Chapter 653, Attracting Spirit Beasts. I guess I'll walk to the capital. Jumping down from the branch, Zhang Xian confirmed his direction before walking over. The other party might be on a mission, but this had nothing to do with him. The most important matter for him at the moment was to liaise with Heng Shi and the others and return to Hengyuan Master Teacher Academy rather than waste his time here. Walala. After taking a few steps, Zhang Xian heard some heavy footsteps. He immediately leaped up and hid in the tree. Following which, he saw a few large spirit beasts sniffing off the ground before rushing in the direction where Luo Qiqi and the others disappeared to. They found them. Zhang Xian frowned. Even though these spirit beasts were only at Transcendent Mortal 5 Dan, other than Yi Qian, Luo Qiqi and the others were all 6 Dan experts, it would still be a difficult battle to fight against them. I guess I should still offer them some help. Thinking so, Zhang Xian followed behind the spirit beasts. No matter what, he was acquainted with Princess Feier and the others, and Luo Qiqi was his apothecary student as well. He couldn't just stand idly by the side knowing that they were in danger. Roar! Roar! Damn it, they're here again. Yi Qian, you're up. A ruckus sounded ahead of him, and following which, a violent ripple of energy spread from the forest. They've started fighting. Knowing that there was no time to lose, Zhang Xian immediately rushed forward, only to hear a sharp gust of wind blowing above him. Raising his head, he saw a massive dracoeagle beast swooping down to grab him. It was the same one that had been amongst the beasts surrounding the white-robed lady back then. As Zhang Xian had been hiding within the lush crown of the trees while concealing his aura, he hadn't been noticed by the spirit beasts yet. However, as soon as he drove his Jinqi and charged forward, they immediately noticed his presence. Having met its mortal enemy, the dracoeagle beast's eyes reddened in wrath. Its steel talons sliced through the air, producing a sharp screeching sound that seemed as though it would tear through even metal. If I get entangled with it, it'll become hard for me to escape later on. Knowing that, if he were to waste time on this fellow, the other spirit beasts would soon gather around him and it would be hard for him to leave then, Zhang Xian clenched his jaws. Moo! The dracoeagle beast possessed the dragon bloodline as well, so the mysterious beast language that he learned previously should be effective on it as well. Through practice, he had realized that its effects were less significant on those that didn't possess the dragon bloodline. As this was the only spirit beast that possessed the dragon bloodline back then, he knew that he would be slaughtered by the other spirit beasts once he expends all of his Jinqi on the beast language. It had insane Jinqi consumption after all. Thus, the only viable course of action back then was to escape. And as expected, after the shout, the dracoeagle beast suddenly froze in fear, and it began plummeting from the sky. Putong! The spirit beast with a wingspan of 10 meters fell heavily to the ground, creating a cloud of dust in the air as it twitched uncontrollably. Roar! After dealing with this huge fellow, Zhang Xian was just about to leave when he heard a roaring sound. The armored bear tiger from before leaped up, and swinging its claws, a sharp force came falling onto him. The commotion from before had attracted the attention of the spirit beasts. As the fastest spirit beast in the area, this fellow immediately rushed over to help. This will be troublesome. The other party had its eyes fixed on him as though he had killed the other party's parents. Knowing that a battle wasn't avoidable anymore, Zhang Xian shook his head. Since you want a battle you will get. It just happened that my cultivation has raised by a fair bit, so I guess I'll just try it out on you. Zhang Xian thrust his palm forward with astounding might, creating a powerful shock wave that immediately covered a distance of dozens of meters to strike the armored bear tiger. Voila! He hadn't used his soul energy in this attack, but even so, with the strength of his physical body and Jinqi harnessed behind it, the might of the attack exceeded 6 million ding. This was far beyond the tolerable limit for the armored bear tiger. The force from its claws was immediately dissipated, and its body was pressed down firmly against the ground. Roar! The armored bear tiger widened its eyes in shock, as though it had seen a ghost. Just 3 days ago, it fought with this fellow, and while the other party's swordsmanship was exquisite, he was still far lacking in strength to stand against it. How could it possibly gain the strength to overwhelm him completely with just a single palm in just a few days? This was, way too exaggerated. If it had known that the other party was so formidable, it wouldn't have dared to prowl around in search of him. Instead, it would have certainly made sure to hide well so as to stay out of the other party's way. Don't you dare pursue me anymore. Otherwise, I'll start spilling blood. A roar, and the Draco-Eagle beast plummeted to the ground. A palm, and the armored bear tiger lost its fighting will. Harumphing coldly, Zhang Xian flung his sleeves and turned around to assist Luo Qiqi and the others. However, at this moment, the group of spirit beasts consisting of the Grand Lion's spirit beasts and a few others who were further in front turned around and encircled Zhang Xian. Most probably, the Draco-Eagle beast had called for them before engaging Zhang Xian in a fight. Since you came knocking on your own accord, don't blame me if you were to get injured. Initially, Zhang Xian had no plans of going after these spirit beasts. But since they had come over to challenge him, there was no reason for him to hold back at all. Leaping lightly off the tree, Zhang Xian dashed forward. Heaven's Path Movement Art. Along with the growth of his physical body and cultivation, Zhang Xian's control over Heaven's Path Movement Art was getting more and more adept, and his maximum speed had increased as well. In an instant, it was as if he had torn a hole through space and leaped through it, appearing right before the Grand Lion's spirit beast in an instant and knocking it down with his body. You specialize in defense? Fine, I'll use brute strength to crush the defensive ability you are so proud of. Pang! As the two came into collision, the Grand Lion's spirit beast suddenly found its massive body flying backwards swiftly, crashing through dozens of trees in the course of his movement, leaving him lightheaded from the impact. After sending this huge fellow flying, Zhang Xian twisted his body and charged toward a wolf-like spirit beast. Pai Pa! The sheer might of Zhang Xian's fist compressed even air itself. Unable to dodge the attack, the wolf-like spirit beast could only take it forcefully. However, its defense didn't even last for an instant before it was crushed into the ground, subdued. While an intense battle was going on here, Luo Qiqi and the others were dumbfounded. It was just a moment ago that the group of spirit beasts had caught up to them and was readying to launch an attack. Furious, Yu Fei'er pushed Yi Qian forward to take the brunt of the attack. Given Yi Qian's consonant spirit realm cultivation, even if he were to survive this ordeal, he would surely end up lying on the bed for months afterward. Who could have known that, before anything could happen, those furious spirit beasts would suddenly back down? Could it be that they are aware of my identity as the crown prince, so they dared not lay their hands on me? Yi Qian scratched his head in embarrassment. But that was impossible. When had the savage spirit beasts ever considered a person's social standing before ripping him apart? Even an emperor would be no exception to this rule. Someone has attracted the attention of the spirit beasts in our place. Look, there's a battle going on there. With a frown on her face, Yu Fei'er was the first one to figure out the situation. All of the retreating spirit beasts had headed in the same direction, and a violent disturbance in the spiritual energy could be felt from that direction as well. Adding the frenzied roars in that direction, it was clear that a battle was ongoing. Yi Qian, could it be one of your men? Xing Yuan frowned. Their mission had to be carried out in absolute secrecy. As such, they had strictly told Yi Qian that he was not to allow anyone to follow them. In order to ensure that, they even chose to walk on foot instead of riding on an aerial spirit beast. Given that someone had lured the spirit beasts away as soon as they had met with danger, they found it hard to believe that it wasn't the doing of Yi Qian's men. It isn't me, I didn't allow anyone to follow me. Yi Qian quickly waved his hands to explain himself. He knew how important the mission was, so how could he make such a serious mistake? We'll know once we get there. Luo Qiqi waved her hands. Xing Yuan nodded. Nothing can be allowed to go wrong with our mission. If we really were followed, we will be in deep trouble. With this, the group silently advanced toward the direction where the battle was ongoing. A moment later, they arrived at the scene, and with just a single glance, they all froze. It's Zhang Shi. Why would teacher be here? Wasn't this fellow taken away by his teacher? How could he appear here? Seeing that it was a familiar face, different expressions surfaced on their own faces. The one who was delighted was naturally Luo Qiqi, whereas the one who despaired was Princess Yu Feier. She had lost a wager with Zhang Xian, so meeting him and having the bet enforced was the last thing she would want to see happening. I know. Teacher must have seen that we were getting attacked, so he intentionally attracted that bunch of spirit beasts over to him. Luo Qiqi suddenly said. You're overthinking the matter, when has he ever been so kind? Yu Feier harumphed. If that wasn't the case, why would the aggression of these spirit beasts suddenly turn from us to him? Given how frenzied they were, it was unlikely that they would have changed target if not for Zhang Laoshi intentionally drawing their attention. Luo Qiqi said. This. Everyone was stunned. Luo Qiqi's words made perfect sense. It was just a moment ago that all of the spirit beasts looked as though they would devour them whole. As such, they thought that a bitter fight awaited them. Yet, in the blink of an eye, they abandoned them and turned their hostility toward Zhang Shi instead. It was a little hard to believe that Zhang Shi hadn't done anything to draw their aggression given such circumstances. Regardless of whether he intentionally drew their attention or not, look at their battle. Wu Zhen interrupted the thoughts of the crowd, and pointed to the battle with a shaking finger. Hearing those words, everyone immediately turned their gazes over. Almost instantly, their pupils dilated in shock, and their mouths went dry. Wasn't he still at Clarifying Turbidity Realm Pinnacle a few days ago? Xing Yuan gulped down his saliva. Just 3 days ago, when they were entering the Cleansing Lake, the other party was still at Clarifying Turbidity Realm Pinnacle. How could he possibly be at Consonant Spirit Realm Pinnacle at this very instant? They had seen geniuses who improved swiftly, but this was completely inconceivable. More importantly, even though he had reached Consonant Spirit Realm, their cultivation was still higher than him. Yet, despite fighting with so many spirit beasts that even they would feel threatened before, he was able to subdue them with ease as though an adult playing with a child. Wasn't his fighting prowess a little way too strong? Princess Yu Feier widened her eyes in shock, and her face twitched violently. She never thought that this shameless figure would actually possess such astounding strength. If the other party had displayed such astounding prowess in their previous battle as well, she would probably have been defeated in a single move. If that was the case, did he do it intentionally? That must be it. Recalling how the other party kicked her bottom, her face flushed from rage. If it wasn't intentional, how could his attacks so coincidentally land on her bottom each time? He could have subdued her easily, but he chose to kick her bottom instead. A ruffian he was indeed. Shameless. Unaware of everyone's thoughts, Yi Qian asked, Senior, since Zhang Shi is so formidable, and he could already be considered as a member of the academy as well, is it possible for us to bring him on the mission with us? With him, I feel that we'll be in a much safer position. Bring teacher along with us. Luo Qiqi's eyes gleamed in excitement. Indeed. With him, the success rate of our mission would be boosted significantly. Your words do make sense. I approve of this matter. After a moment of contemplation, Xing Yuan nodded in agreement. No, he can't go with us. Yu Feier's eyes widened at that suggestion, and she quickly shot it down. Chapter 654, Wu Yangzi, he can't go with us. Luo Qiqi frowned as she turned to look at her close friend. Why? This mission was fraught with danger. Given teacher's wisdom and superior cultivation, he would be able to aid them out of difficult situations. Why would her good friend turn down such a good idea? He is lecherous. Yu Feier exclaimed with gritted teeth. Lecherous? You're overthinking it, he has no interest in you at all. Luo Qiqi shook her head at her good friend's words. She had confidence in this aspect. Putting everything aside, Luo Qiqi's appearance was top-notch as well, comparable to Princess Yufei. Yet, despite her beauty and her respect for Zhang Shi, the other party never even spared her a glance. Given how obstinate you are, that's even more impossible. Yufei staggered backward as her vision darkened. What do you mean by this? No interest in me. I'm not that bad, alright? Why does it sound as though I was turned down by the other party? As an esteemed princess, I should be the one turning others down. Qiqi is right. Zhang Shi has high standards. He has a student known as Wang Ying who is much prettier than you, I've seen her myself, but he has no interest in her whatsoever. Given that, it's unlikely for him to be interested in you either. Xing Yuan nodded in agreement. Given his fondness for Yufei, he felt threatened by Zhang Xian's capability and the intricate relationship between the duo. Thus, he had his men investigate the latter's background. Not only did Zhang Shi have a student who was even more beautiful than Yufei, he had also had many pursuers in the past, but he still remained unmoved by any of them. Yufei might be beautiful, but her temper was simply horrendous. Even Xing Yuan could only barely tolerate it himself. For others, it was probably completely out of question. What did you say? Luo, the sound of teeth gritting against one another sounded as Yufei glared at Xing Yuan with widened eyes while emanating blatant killing intent. Xing Yuan, why don't you try repeating what you have just said? A cold shiver ran through Xing Yuan. Seeing that Xing Yuan was frightened into such a state, Wu Zhen chuckled lightly beneath his hand. However, a cold glare from Yufei immediately removed any hilarity he saw in this matter. What are you laughing for? Are you dying for another beating? Wu Zhen trembled. I'm just watching the commotion, there's no need to involve me in your affairs, right? Alright, enough. I'll invite teacher later on, and Fei, you'd better don't talk at all. I fear that teacher might try to enforce the bet or command you to serve him if you get on his bad side. Seeing the group falling into an argument before the entrance to the underground chamber had even been found, Luo Qiqi shook her head. Upon hearing the words, enforce the bet, Princess Fei suddenly recalled the matter of her being a maid, and this immediately silenced her. By the time the argument among them halted, Zhang Xian was already done cleaning up the spirit beasts. The 30 or so spirit beasts were lying on the floor, moaning in agony. This time, the beast hunters didn't come along. However, even if they did, the same fate probably would have awaited them. Seeing Zhang Xian clap his hands and preparing to leave after clearing up the spirit beasts, Luo Qiqi yelled and walked over. Teacher! Little Qi! Zhang Xian smiled. In truth, he had noticed the group as soon as they arrived. Since he had come to save them, there was nothing for him to hide. Walking up to Zhang Xian, Luo Qiqi bowed deeply and said, Teacher, I have an insolent request that I need to ask of you. I wish to invite teacher to participate in a mission from the academy. Luo Qiqi began explaining the matter. Mission? Zhang Xian waved his hands. I'll pass on the matter. I still need to meet up with Heng Shi and the others, and head for Hengyuan Master Teacher Academy. Hearing Zhang Xian's words, Luo Qiqi was taken aback for a moment before replying. Heng Shi. They have already left. Left? Zhang Xian frowned. How could they leave without the champion of the Master Teacher Tournament? Indeed. In order to make it in time for the opening ceremony, they took a flying ship of the Huanyu Empire royalty along with the others. Before leaving, Heng Shi consulted Pavilion Master Imo on your matter, and it was only with his agreement that they decided to leave. Luo Qiqi replied. Flying ship? Zhang Xian asked doubtfully. It's a military transportation device found only within empires. It is driven by dozens of spirit beasts, and the ship can house up to 1,000 people. Seeing that her apothecary teacher hadn't even heard of such a thing before, Luo Qiqi looked at him in bewilderment. There was no master teacher in the empire who didn't know about flying ships. Given how knowledgeable he was and how formidable his teacher was, how could he have never heard of flying ships before? Zhang Xian nodded. Truthfully, he had been thinking that given how far an empire's territory stretched, if a war were to happen, wouldn't it take years just to deploy troops, needless to say, send reinforcements in? It turned out that there was a transportation device for this very purpose. To use dozens of aerial spirit beasts to ferry 1,000 people at once, probably only the royalty of an empire would possess the wealth and resources to do so. Right, Heng Shi took teacher's students along with him as well. He said that there's no need to worry about you since you were with Yang Shi, and it would be best for them to wait for you at Hongyuan Empire. Luo Qiqi continued filling Zhang Xian in on the details. Hearing those words, Zhang Xian smiled bitterly. He didn't expect so many things to happen in the 3 days that he was out. Everyone thought that given how formidable Yang Shi was, he would be completely safe together with him. They probably never could have imagined that, the seemingly omnipotent Yang Shi in their mind was actually just a hoax, a fictional character. Forget it. Zhang Xian shook his head. He was still worried about his students and Sun Chang since Heng Shi had left, but since Heng Shi had taken them along with him, they should be fine. All he had to do was to appear at Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy when the time comes. Since there was nothing tying him down now, Zhang Xian became curious about the mission Luo Qiqi spoke of. So, what kind of mission are you all on? Zhang Xian asked. Luo Qiqi hesitated for a moment before switching to telepathic message. It's the underground chamber of 6-star blacksmith Wu Yangzi. 6-star blacksmith. Zhang Xian's eyebrows shot up. Wu Yangzi is an extremely famous grandmaster blacksmith from 3,000 years ago, and he possesses blacksmithing skills unmatched by any. He is known as Hongyuan Empire's #1 blacksmith in the past 10,000 years. In fact, even the royal seal currently used was crafted by his hands. Luo Qiqi explained. If he is a grandmaster blacksmith of Hongyuan Empire, why would his underground chamber be located here? Zhang Xian asked doubtfully. Hongyuan Empire was at least several million kilometers away from here. Why would a grandmaster blacksmith travel so far out here? Luo Qiqi scratched her head awkwardly and said, he was kidnapped. Kidnapped? For a 6-star master teacher, whose cultivation had reached saint rank, to be kidnapped, are you for real? Besides, standing behind every single blacksmith was the entire blacksmith guild. It was one of the strongest occupation alliance even when considering the entire continent. To dare to lay their hands on one of their esteemed members, who could be so arrogant? Given how formidable his blacksmithing skills are, it is believed that someone captured him to have him forge weapons for them. Due to this matter, the Master Teacher Pavilion and Blacksmith Guild sent many experts out to search through the entire Hongyuan Empire, but they were still unable to find him, Luo Qiqi said. However, in the last few months, while I was reading through some ancient texts, I found some clues about the incident back then. You? Zhang Xian was perplexed. Given how so many experts in the Master Teacher Pavilion and Blacksmith Guild failed to find anything at all, how could she, a mere 5-star primary master teacher and grade 2 student of Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, possibly find any clues? More importantly, there was an interval of several thousand years in between. Actually, it's all just a deduction on my part. On top of forging pills, I have an interest in smithing as well, and Grandmaster Wu Yangzi has always been a person I deeply respected. I even once tried to learn his zither forging technique, but due to his incomplete heritage, I was only able to learn a small portion of it. Luo Qiqi explained. I did some research on the matter, and I realized that there were actually some weapons in Huanyu Empire that were created using such a forging technique. Perplexed, I did some investigation, and in the midst of doing so, I chanced upon a map to an underground chamber. That was why I applied for this mission with the Academy. But of course, it's still too early to tell whether it leads to Grandmaster Wu Yangzi's underground chamber or not. Zhang Xian nodded. To actually notice some clues based on how a weapon was forged, it seemed like Luo Qiqi was a truly tenacious person. But thinking about it, if not for her tenacity, how could she, a talented grade 2 genius and a transcendent mortal 6 Dan pinnacle cultivator, possibly acknowledge him as her teacher without any hesitation? Even though teacher hasn't reported to the Master Teacher Academy yet, you can already be considered as a member of the Academy already. Thus, you're qualified to participate in this mission as well. Furthermore, the purpose of this mission is just to find whether the underground chamber exists and whether it is related to Wu Yangzi. There is not much danger involved in it. As long as we succeed, we'll obtain 2 academic credits, and this will surely prove to be useful to teacher in the future. Luo Qiqi smiled. Academic credits? Zhang Xian was baffled by those words. As the librarian of a high school in his previous life, he had heard of this term before. Was there something like that in the Master Teacher Academy as well? Academic credits are something unique to Master Teacher Academies. It's said to be a system enforced by Kongshi personally. It serves as a judging criterion, and students can use it to purchase better cultivation resources, lessons for higher-ranked master teachers, or even a currency for purchasing anything at all. Without these, students will find themselves unable to make any progress within the academy. In fact, one could say that the most valuable items in the Master Teacher Academy aren't spirit stones or tutelage jade tokens but academic credits. Luo Qiqi explained. As master teachers, those in the Master Teacher Academy had no lack of tutelage jade tokens and spirit stones, and thus, such resources had lower value there. Is there an academic credit criterion to graduation? Zhang Xian asked with a bizarre expression. Of course not. Academic credits are just a currency used among students, they aren't a fundamental criterion for graduation. How can one possibly be barred from graduation just because they don't have sufficient academic credits? Luo Qiqi replied in exclamation. Only then did Zhang Xian heave a sigh of relief. Taking the model from high schools in his previous life, he thought that academic credits would be a necessary requirement for graduation, but it seemed like the only thing alike was its name. In essence, they were 2 completely different items. Teacher, do you want to come with us? If this is the underground chamber where Grandmaster Wu Yangzi was locked in, there's a high chance that his heritage will be inside. Luo Qiqi said. Heritage? Zhang Xian was taken aback for a moment before his eyes lit up. I heard that blacksmiths specialize in training their bodies. Suppose that he really left his heritage there, is it possible that there will be a physical body cultivation technique within it? Even though Zhang Xian's body and soul were in perfect consonance already, his body was still slightly weaker than his soul. If his soul were to grow larger than 10 meters once again, the same incompatibility issue would crop up once more. Zhang Xian couldn't possibly abandon his soul cultivation, so it would be best if he could find some physical body cultivation technique to train his body. Given that blacksmiths spent their days with flames, ores, and metals, their body had to be exceptionally resilient. Thus, they usually possessed a unique physical body cultivation technique. Chapter 655, Formation Destroying Silver Needle. Not expecting to hear such a question, a bizarre expression appeared on Luo Qiqi's face as she replied, there should be. Not only is Grandmaster Wu Yangzi a blacksmith, he's also an expert at tempering his physical body. Alright, I'll go then. Chuckling lightly, Zhang Xian nodded in agreement. A high requirement for one's physical resilience and might stood in the way of those who sought the path of a blacksmith. Without sufficient strength, one would be unable to forge the best of weapons. Thus, every master blacksmith that had ever existed was an expert at tempering their physical body. It would be much better for Zhang Xian to obtain the cultivation technique of a 6-star blacksmith than to search through the entire Huanyu Empire for other physical body cultivation techniques. Great! Hearing her teacher agree to join them on this exploration, Luo Qiqi was filled with excitement. Even though it hadn't been long since she had met this apothecary teacher of hers, the other party gave her the feeling of an unfathomable person. Somehow, she felt that they would be much safer were he to accompany them. Having come to an agreement, Luo Qiqi beckoned the others over, and Princess Fei and the others walked up to the duo. I did lose the bet at the cleansing lake, but don't you dare use it to blackmail me. As soon as Princess Fei walked up to Zhang Xian, she immediately gritted her teeth and said, I'll prepare the spirit stones, but I'll only be able to repay you when we arrive at Hongyuan Empire. Given that something abrupt occurred in the cleansing lake, and neither of us completed the conditions of the bet, why don't we just call it a draw? Seeing how the other party accepted the results of the bet candidly, Zhang Xian chuckled lightly. He was the one who collapsed the entire cleansing lake. While he did make some compensation to Huanyu Empire, he still felt a little embarrassed by the matter. After all, the farce did occur due to his carelessness. Since something abrupt occurred before any of them could finish the bet, naturally, there wasn't a winner or a loser. A draw? Princess Fei was taken aback. She'd thought that the other party would grasp onto this to force her to serve as his maid or taunt her, leaving her in a difficult and embarrassed position. Who knew that he would offer a truce instead? Could he really be that generous? That's right. But of course, if you're not content with the results, we could always have another bet. Zhang Xian continued. Princess Fei's mouth twitched, and she hurriedly shook her head. There's no need for it. It was just a moment ago that she thought the other party was generous when he uttered such kind words. But now it seemed like everything he said was a mere facade. Have another bet? You must be taking me for a fool. After losing so tragically twice, if I were to continue betting with you, it would just be a matter of time before I'm completely broke. What about you all? Are any of you interested in betting against me for Princess Fei's sake? Seeing how the lady paled upon hearing his words, Zhang Xian shook his head and turned his gaze to Xing Yuan and the others. Honestly, these bets were truly too good a source of income to miss. After all, even though he might have quite a few spirit stones at hand for the moment, considering the immense spiritual energy consumption for the Heaven's Path divine art, it probably wouldn't be too long before his wealth dried up. We'll pass. Xing Yuan and the others flinched upon seeing Zhang Xian's sight on them. Betting against you is like betting on a rigged game. No matter how foolish I am, I can't possibly bet on something that I can't win in. Sigh, I don't even get a chance to lose at all. Seeing that no one dared to bet against him, Zhang Xian shook his head in disappointment. Are these truly geniuses from the Master Teacher Academy? To dare not engage in a bet against him, weren't they a little too cowardly? If the others were to learn of his thoughts, tears would definitely start streaming down their faces. We aren't the ones who are weak, it's you who is monstrously strong, all right? The previous head of the mystical treasure hall devoted decades to the deciphering of the stone pillars only to meet with little success, and you completed what he couldn't within seconds. The other master teachers took days to absorb the spiritual energy from the lake eye, but you actually took in almost everything within minutes. Who would possibly be so bored as to challenge you in an impossible bet? Let's hurry to the underground chamber. Knowing that Zhang Xian had a formidable teacher whom even Pavilion Master Mo was deferential to, not to mention, he himself possessed exceptional strength as well, Xing Yuan and the others didn't dare to view him as an ordinary freshman. Instead, they thought of him as a fellow peer. The next matter they had at hand was to find the entrance to the underground chamber. They swiftly introduced themselves before scaling across the mountain before them and walking into a vast valley. Luo Qiqi came to a stop. Based on the descriptions in the map, the underground chamber should be located here. Here. Xing Yuan and the others glanced at one another in confusion. This valley wasn't too huge, and it looked perfectly ordinary on the outside. Surrounding them were trees and plants, and the chirps from birds echoed harmoniously in the area, creating an exceptionally lively scenery. However, after searching around, they couldn't find any entrance that could possibly lead to an underground chamber. Could the news have been false, or did they get the wrong location? This is the very valley where the weapon forged using the zither forging technique was found by a beast hunter 3,000 years ago. Through my investigation, it seems that 6 other weapons forged using the same technique originated from this location as well. Corroborating these with my other intelligence, I'm certain that there's an underground chamber here. Luo Qiqi said confidently. However, the spiritual energy in the air is exceptionally stable, and there isn't the slightest disturbance to be felt. It doesn't seem like there's a formation here though. Xing Yuan and the others frowned. If the entrance to the underground chamber wasn't plain to their eyes, it could only mean that it was hidden beneath a formation. However, given the lack of disturbance in the spiritual energy in the surroundings, it was impossible for there to be a formation here. Let me take a look. I'm a 5-star formation master, so I should be able to find the formation and decipher it if there's one. Princess Fair stepped forward. Their group didn't come together just based on their degree of intimacy. Their expertise also complemented the flaws of one another. One would require 5 5-star supporting occupations to qualify as a 5-star master teacher, and Princess Yufair happened to be a 5-star formation master as well. Everyone nodded. Princess Fair flicked her wrist and took out a compass. Following which, she circled around the valley, searching around with every step she took. A moment later, she abruptly came to a halt. Flicking her wrist, she took out a sharp needle reminiscent of a spear. It was hard to tell what it was forged on by its outer appearance, but there was a unique inscription on it which emanated a cold gleam. Noticing the doubtful gazes from Yi Qian and the others, Luo Qiqi explained what it was. This is a formation-destroying silver needle. Formation-destroying silver needle. There are some high-grade formations that absorb spiritual energy from the environment and hide themselves within their environment, thus making them extremely difficult to detect. Thus, such a tool is required to make their true forms appear. There are special formation inscriptions on it that can send the spiritual energy harnessed within a formation into disarray, forcing it to reveal itself, Luo Qiqi explained. Only then did everyone understand the situation and nod their heads. Zhang Xian also nodded too as he examined the needle with a peculiar gaze. He had read about formation-destroying silver needles in the books from the Formation Master Guild before, and it was written inside that they had the ability to dispel formations. Zhang Xian thought that such a tool would only be seen in higher-tier Formation Master Guilds, but to think that Princess Fair would have won with her as well. It seemed like they did come prepared. After drawing the formation-destroying silver needle, Princess Fair didn't rush into action. Instead, she walked around with the compass in hand and even bent down to pinch the soil before and pluck a few blades of wild grass. High-grade formations could change their weak point depending on the geography of the location. If one couldn't find the crux of the formation, nothing one did would be able to sway the formation. It was just like how if one wanted to sink the boat, one had to open up a hole in the crucial regions. Otherwise, even if one were to crack open a gaping hole in the deck, it wouldn't do anything at all. Step back. After taking a look, Yufair seemed to have found something, and she turned around and waved her hands to gesture for the others to step back. Knowing how dangerous the formation could be, Luo Qiqi and the others retreated to outside the valley without saying anything. After the group stepped out of the valley, a deep frown appeared on Princess Fair's face. All of the sudden, her disposition changed into that of a valiant warrior on the battlefield. Who? With a flick of her wrist, she threw the formation-destroying silver needle out, and it fell onto a region not too far away from her. Following which, she formed a few seals with her hands before tapping on the needle forcefully. Wang! The silver needle began to spin. As it spun, the formation inscriptions on the surface of the silver needle seemed to have turned into a vortex of spiritual energy, drawing in the spiritual energy in the surroundings into its center. Eventually, it formed a massive pillar of spiritual energy that extended to the heavens. The formation-destroying silver needle can draw spiritual energy from the surroundings and cause a huge spiritual energy disturbance, thus forcing even the greatest of formation to show its marks, Luo Qiqi explained. Zhang Xian nodded. Formations were sustained by spiritual energy, and if the spiritual energy in the surroundings was sapped dry, it would lose its balance, thus revealing its form. It was the same logic as how the rocks at the bottom of the river would be revealed as the current ran dry. The collapsing of the formation at the cleansing lake was also due to its balance being destroyed. Hoo. As the rotation of the silver needle hastened, more and more spiritual energy was drawn from the surrounding. At the same time, a thick layer of sweat cloaked Princess Feyer's forehead. Open. With a slight buzz, the surroundings of the silver needle abruptly distorted. A slight mist came into appearance. Indeed, there's a formation here. Upon seeing the mist, everyone's eyes lit up. The mist was the sign of the presence of a formation. This meant that Luo Qiqi's deduction was accurate, and it was highly likely there was an underground chamber here. Woo. The rotation of the silver needle quickened even more, but Princess Feyer was already wearied. Given how this formation was able to remain hidden so many years without being noticed, there was no doubt that it was a high-grade formation. Even a 5-star formation master like her was finding it difficult to break open the formation. Who? Exhaling a mouthful of turbid air, Princess Feyer halted the formation-destroying silver needle before falling to the floor weakly. Exhausted, she couldn't even care about her own appearance at this moment. How is it? Seeing her state, Luo Qiqi immediately rushed up and fed her a pill to recover her vitality. Only then did her pale complexion finally recover slightly. After resting for a moment, Princess Feyer stood up and shook her head. There's a grade 6 formation here. Due to my limited cultivation, I'm unable to force it to show itself. She had put her entire strength into the previous attempt, but she was only able to force out hints of the formation. Her current strength was still a little too low to force it out entirely. If even you are unable to force out the formation, how can we enter the underground chamber? Luo Qiqi frowned. If they couldn't even force the formation to appear, naturally, they wouldn't be able to decipher it either, let alone enter the underground chamber. They had come here proudly to accomplish a mission, but who knew that they would be stopped right at the doorstep? If they were to return like that, they would surely become a laughingstock. I don't know either. Princess Feyer shook her head. She thought that with her capability as a 5-star formation master, even if she couldn't decipher the formation, it shouldn't be too hard for her to force the formation to show its form. Who knew that she would end in failure? She couldn't help but feel disappointed. Gritting her teeth, Princess Feyer said, "Allow me to rest for a moment first, I'll give it a try after I've recuperated fully." However, at that moment, a nonchalant voice suddenly sounded. "This won't work." Turning around, she saw Zhang Xian walking up to her. "You know formation deciphering too?" Seeing that he was the one who spoke, Princess Feyer harumphed. "Since you said that this won't work, why don't you share your wisdom with us and tell us what incredible plan you have in mind?" "I dare not say my plan is incredible, but since there's a formation here, all we have to do is to decipher it, right? Why must we go through an additional step to force it to show itself?" Zhang Xian replied. Since the purpose was to find the entrance of the formation, they could just decipher the formation straight. Why go through the additional step of forcing it out? Princess Feyer flung her sleeves and harumphed coldly. "You're proposing for us to decipher the formation directly? Humph, do you even know the slightest thing about formations?" Chapter 656, Underground Chamber. If a formation didn't show its form, could one tell whether it's a confinement formation, slaughter formation, illusory formation, or beguilement formation? It was just like fighting an unidentifiable spirit beast. If one couldn't even see its form and identify its flaws, how did one intend to kill it? You must be kidding. Those who knew the slightest thing about formations wouldn't utter such amateurish words. The way of formation is deep and profound, and it has a long heritage behind of it. It's one of the top occupations throughout the entire continent, paling little in comparison to even master teacher. Such profound knowledge, and all you can say is to decipher it. You sure know how to speak rubbish. Princess Fair harumphed coldly. This was her chance to get back at the other party for the previous 2 humiliations. Her eyebrows shot up, and she spoke majestically. This valley might not be too big, but it is more than 100 mu, 6 hectare. Furthermore, there are a few thousand different flora and fauna in here. As for the geography, it is located within a mountain range and is connected to a forest and a lake. Its east is faced with Yang, whereas its west is faced with Yin. In other words, it's a blessed land suited for setting up all kinds of formations. Just speaking of grade 6 formations, there are 14,372 types that could be set up here. Each of them also has innumerable different variations. Unless the formation is dragged into sight and analyzed, it's impossible to tell which it is. If one doesn't know the formation's type, variation, area, and strength. Let me ask you, how could one decipher the formation? Flinging her sleeves, Princess Fair harumphed coldly. Xing Yuan and the others nodded in agreement. While Yu Fair could be obstinate at times, and she was extremely emotionally charged in her actions, she did possess incredible talent in formations. She was a famous formation master genius even within the Master Teacher Academy. This was also the main reason why Luo Qiqi invited the other party along after receiving the mission. Not expecting her good friend to put down her teacher, Luo Qiqi frowned. Enough, Fair. Even if teacher doesn't know much about formation, you can still explain the situation to him calmly. There's no need to use such a tone with him. Her teacher might be a rare genius in pill forging, even a 6-star apothecary would pale before him, but in the field of formations, he did seem to be a little lacking. However, this was to be expected. After all, it was impossible for one to be proficient in everything. Unfazed by the other party's rant, Zhang Xian continued making his point. You're just making things pointlessly complicated. Formations are created by placing formation flags in alignment with the environment. As long as we find the formation flags, it should be easy to stop the formation. Formations are indeed created by formation flags, but do you know how many combinations of formation flags there are? Even if one were to know where the flags are located, one must remove it in a strict sequential order. Or else, it could possibly bring about a backlash from the formation, causing everyone here to die. Hearing the nonsensical words that the other party was spouting, Yu Fair's face reddened in anger. What the heck was this? If she knew how ignorant this fellow was in the way of formations, she would have challenged him to a duel on that back then. Cough cough. Teacher, formations cannot be broken that easily, not to mention, this kind of hidden formation. It is impossible to find the formation flag under such circumstances. Luo Qiqi's face also reddened as she quickly explained the situation to the other party. However, before she could finish her words, the young man before her scratched his head and stomped on the ground. So, a formation flag popped up and fell into his hands. Holding onto it, Zhang Xian turned to look at the group with a sheepish expression. This should be the formation flag, right? It doesn't seem to be as troublesome as you all make it out to be. Ah! Everyone was stunned. In that instant, they looked as though they had seen a ghost. It was just a moment ago that they thought the other party was just an ignorant oaf who was trying to show off. However, upon seeing this sight, their eyes were about to pop out from their sockets. This was especially so for Yu Fair. Was this for real? She had spent so much effort on trying to force out the formation that she was completely drained at this very moment. Yet, she could just barely see a slight hint of the formation. Yet, that fellow, with just a casual step, actually took out a formation flag. What was with this huge disparity? This does seem to be the formation flag. Luo Qiqi gulped down her saliva. This formation flag looked ancient, and it had suffered significant wear and tear from the trial of time. With just a glance, anyone could tell that it had been buried underground for a very long time. The chances were that it had originated from the formation that appeared earlier. Fair, look. Luo Qiqi exclaimed. Suppressing her shock, Princess Fei said, "Look at what?" Even if he coincidentally found one formation flag, it would be futile if he can't remove the remaining ones sequentially. If a grade 6 formation could be torn down that easily, 6-star formation masters wouldn't have such a prestigious standing. So what if you found one formation flag by coincidence? Formations like this have at least 100 formation flags scattered all around. You might have altered the structure of the formation by extracting one of them, but you are a long way off from destroying it. In fact, a careless mistake might even cause the entire formation to explode. The accumulation of spiritual energy of a formation that had been operated for several millenniums was frightening. If it were to explode, the consequences would be as dire as what happened in the cleansing lake. Even a transcendent mortal 8-dan expert could be blown to bits in an instant. Formations weren't a joke. If it could be dispelled so easily, why would 6-star formation masters waste so much effort learning the art? The more she thought about it, the angrier she felt. Princess Fei was just about to lecture the other party when she felt someone pulling on her arm. Shifting her gaze, she realized that it was her close friend, Luo Qiqi. Perplexed, she frowned. "What's wrong?" "Don't say anything else, just look over there." Luo Qiqi's face was pale in shock. "Look over there." Princess Fei turned her gaze over, and the sight that stood before her left her face twitching uncontrollably. She nearly fainted on the spot. Unknowingly, the young man who she'd thought was still standing beside her was already 20 meters away. While walking, he would bend down from time to time to pluck out a formation flag, just like a farmer pulling out onions from his field. As though to further exaggerate things, he was even whistling leisurely. Who? Her eyes rolled up. Princess Fei was on the verge of tears. "Do you really need to be so exaggerated? That's a formation that I failed to force out despite using the entirety of my strength, and yet there you are, plucking out its flags one after another casually." When dealing with hidden formations, even the greatest formation masters would use the formation-destroying silver needle to force it out first before analyzing its type based on the spiritual energy it exuded before deducing the location of its life gate. Yet, this ignorant fellow simply jumped past all those steps and began plucking out the flags. Have we gone crazy? Of course, if it was just plucking out formation flags, most people could do it. But, you don't know the slightest thing about formations, and the flags were also hidden as well, so how could you do it so confidently and leisurely? To even begin whistling on top of that. Are you that confident that there would be no backlash? It was truly fortunate that she didn't bet with him earlier, otherwise she would be deeper in debt at this very moment. It seems like, teacher does know the location of every single formation flag, as well as the sequence so as to prevent any backlash. Luo Qiqi felt her throat turning dry. Based on her teacher's words previously, she thought that he didn't know anything about formations at all. Only now did she realize that she was gravely mistaken, the other party was in truth a master at formations. Even Princess Fei, a 5-star formation master, was far from a match for him. In fact, she didn't think that even the formation masters who expertise in deciphering formation could do it the way he did. I mean, look at that, precise footsteps, leisurely posture, bored gaze, and relaxed whistling. The hell? Tell us the truth, are you the one who set up this formation? Otherwise, how could you be so familiar with it? He actually broke the formation just like that. Xing Yuan, Wu Zhen, and Yi Qian also rubbed their eyes in disbelief as they glanced at one another in astonishment. Hidden formations were one of the hardest types of formation to decipher. If one couldn't force it out, it would be impossible to decipher it. Yet, to be plucking out the formation flags while whistling so leisurely. They had never seen such an unbelievable sight in their life before. Why did it feel as though they were dreaming? I'm done. Amidst everyone's dumbstruck gazes, the young man flicked his wrist and put the pile of formation flags into his storage ring. After which, he clapped away the dust from his hands before turning to look at the group. Even though the formation flags were already worn out, he could still set up a grade 6 formation with it. Not to mention, it was also an antique, so it would probably fetch a hefty price in an auction. The group hurriedly scanned the surrounding, and they noticed a clear change in the previously empty valley. A massive gate, 6 meters tall, appeared right before their eyes. It was hard to tell what metal it was forged with, but it was full of aged marks that indicated more than a millennium of history behind it. Beyond the gate was a flight of stairs that headed deep into the underground. From the spot they were standing at, it seemed to lead into an abyss. It's indeed that underground chamber. Upon seeing the gate, everyone's eyes lit up in excitement. This proved that Luo Qiqi's deduction was accurate. While the evidence that Luo Qiqi provided was credible, and the odds were in their favor, if not, the Academy wouldn't have offered them this mission for academic credits after cross-checking the evidence. They still couldn't hold back their agitation at having found a concrete lead on Grandmaster Wu Yangzi. Let's enter. Xing Yuan's eyes were gleaming with excitement. Wait a moment first. It's hard to tell how long it's been since the underground chamber was last opened, so there might be all kinds of poisonous fumes inside. Luo Qiqi stepped forward to stop him. Flicking her wrist, she took out a jade bottle. This is an antidote that I forged specially for this occasion. It can neutralize up to 1,000 types of poisonous fumes found in underground chambers. After which, she opened the jade bottle, and round pills rolled out. Given the lack of ventilation within a typical underground chamber, rotting corpses, insects, and natural-produced gases were among many factors that could lead to poisonous fumes in it. Thus, Luo Qiqi specially prepared pills to deal with this. Otherwise, even a Cosmos Bridge realm expert might fall under the venomous onslaught. Knowing that this was a matter involving their safety, everyone took a pill and swallowed it without protesting. Zhang Xian was no exception either. He took a pill and swallowed it too. After swallowing the medicine, Luo Qiqi turned to Wu Zhen and said, "Wu Zhen, since you specialize in mechanisms, we'll be depending on you later on." Among the group, Wu Zhen was a proficient celestial designer, and he possessed extensive knowledge over the various kinds of mechanisms and traps. Given that they were stepping into uncharted territory, there was no guarantee that there would be no defensive mechanisms to fend off intruders. "Leave it to me." Flicking his wrist, Wu Zhen took out an artifact reminiscent of an umbrella. It was a tool that celestial designers use specially for deciphering mechanisms, a 1,000 utility umbrella. "Let's go." Opening the 1,000 utility umbrella, Wu Zhen led the way in. Without any hesitation, the rest of the group followed along as well. Seeing that they were prepared, Zhang Xian also followed behind Luo Qiqi. Darkness immediately overwhelmed them as soon as they stepped through the gate, rendering them blind. Xing Yuan stepped forward, flicked his wrist, and a few night illumination pearls immediately rolled down the stairs, providing illumination for the group. For the time being, the sound of pearls rolling down was still echoing ceaselessly throughout the chamber, indicating the deep depth of the underground chamber. Scanning the surroundings and confirming that everyone was safe, Wu Zhen said, "Let's proceed then," before leading the way forward. Chapter 657, 2 stone tablets. The further down they proceeded, the colder they felt. A sinister sensation gripped them as though they had stepped into a graveyard. It was fortunate that they were only surrounded by ordinary cavern walls. There were no mechanisms, formations, or any other traps, and this left them sighing in relief. After descending for several hundred meters, they arrived at a vast underground chamber. Xing Yuan took out another handful of night illumination pearls and threw them forward. Hula! The night illumination pearls rolled across the entire chamber, bringing dim light to the room. Due to the high cultivation of the group, they were still able to see the sight before them clearly despite the dim illumination. Not too far from the stone stairs was a small bridge with a small stream flowing through it. Oddly, despite being sealed for innumerable years, the air in the underground chamber wasn't stale at all. The group had expected to encounter pungent and poisonous gas that had accumulated over the years, but never had they thought that the air down here would be the same as the air at the surface. Everyone, be careful. This underground chamber was probably built to house many people. Otherwise, it's impossible for it to be so well ventilated, said Wu Zhen. To house many people. The others frowned. That's right. If that's not the case, there's no need to go through the effort of drawing a stream from the river over here or ventilate it so thoroughly. Wu Zhen explained. Specializing in mechanisms, he knew how difficult it was to ventilate and draw a stream into an underground chamber. If it was just a temporary lodging for a small group of people, given how vast the space was, they wouldn't run the risk of suffocating. There would be no need for them to go through so much effort to ventilate the place so thoroughly. Hearing his explanation, Zhang Xian nodded in agreement. He had visited the Soul Oracle tomb previously, and it did feel much more stifling than here. The airflow was clearly worse than here. Could it be that there was more than one culprit who kidnapped Grandmaster Wu Yangzi? Luo Qiqi blinked her eyes in shock. Based on her investigation, this underground chamber was closely related to Wu Yangzi, and chances were that he was kidnapped and brought here back then. Given that the environment was built to house many people at once, could it be that Wu Yangzi was held hostage by a group of people? That I can't confirm. Wu Zhen shook his head. There's a stone tablet over there, let's go and take a look. Right in front of the bridge stood an average-sized stone tablet. Under the dim illumination, they could still vaguely see the inscriptions on it. Upon walking up, 3 huge words came into sight. Yearning Abode Lodge. Luo Qiqi frowned. Underground chambers were usually either tombs or a secret gathering location of a power. What did these out-of-place 3 words mean then? These words are a little weird. Yi Qian frowned. Oh. Hearing his interjection, everyone turned to look at him. Even though this crown prince was only a half 5-star master teacher, he had already reached the level of 5-star in the way of painting. Thus, he possessed an exceptional sensitivity toward matters that were in the field of painting. Words can bring out one's true thoughts and mental state. These 3 words have reached the 3rd level, infused intentions, thus allowing one to clearly feel the emotions of the writer then. The feeling I'm getting is that the writer feels out of place and wishes to stay away from the temporal world, Yi Qian said. Zhang Xian nodded. He felt the same feelings from the words as well. Yearning Abode Lodge, both the face meaning of those words and the emotions behind them reflected the writer's intent to return to his hometown. As a skilled painter himself, he could see this much even without the Library of Heaven's Path. Longing for one's home. It seems like this really is the underground chamber where Grandmaster Wu Yangzi was brought. Luo Qiqi's eyes lit up. Most probably, he was kidnapped by someone, and his yearning for Hongyuan Empire compelled him to leave behind these words. But regretfully, until the day of his death, he wasn't able to return there. Your explanation does sound plausible. Xing Yuan and the others nodded. The very fact that an underground chamber was called Yearning Abode Lodge was very bizarre in itself. However, if the person who wrote this was here against their will, that did explain it. It was very possible, and these few words were left behind by Wu Yangzi to express his longing for his home. I disagree with your view. On top of one's longing for his home, there is a strong killing intent reminiscent to that in a battlefield infused into these words as well. Yi Qian frowned. Grandmaster Wu Yangzi was known to be an amiable person, so it's unlikely for such savage killing intent to originate from him. Grandmaster Wu Yangzi had spent his entire life accompanying metal and weapons. Even though his craft was centered around weapons of slaughter, he himself didn't carry such a disposition. However, these 3 words had glaring killing intent infused into them, and that in itself was intriguing. In truth, I think that it's precisely due to the presence of the killing intent that makes it even more likely that it was Grandmaster Wu Yangzi who left it behind. Xing Yuan chuckled. For a proud 6-star blacksmith to be kidnapped and locked in this kind of unholy location, it would instead be bizarre if he carried no killing intent at all. This. Yi Qian was taken aback. Indeed. For a person of such standing to be captured and locked in this kind of gloomy underground chamber, it was only natural that he would feel indignant and motivated to slaughter those who put him into his current state. Luo Qiqi spoke grimly. As a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith, Elder Wu Yangzi's cultivation had long reached Saint Realm. Given that even a person of his strength was trapped here. Everyone, be careful. I fear that this underground chamber might not be as simple as it seems. Everyone nodded as tension built within them. How could an underground chamber that could even lock a Saint Realm cultivator possibly be anything simple? Even though 3,000 years had passed, such means still weren't something that a bunch of Consonant Spirit Realm and Cosmos Bridge Realm fellows could withstand. Let's go. After looking around the stone tablet and confirming that there was nothing useful around it, the group advanced forward. At the back of the group, Zhang Xian spared another glance to the words on the stone tablet and frowned. He walked up to it, touched it lightly with his finger, and seemingly realizing something, a deep frown surfaced on his face. Passing the stone tablet, he proceeded onto the bridge. The bridge wasn't too long, but the current of the stream below was surprisingly swift. The swishing sound of the water felt exceptionally pleasant amidst this ghastly quiet atmosphere. Wu Zhen turned around to nod at the group before placing the 1,000 utility umbrella in front to scout the way. The others followed tightly behind him. At the opposite side of the bridge was a vast hall, and within it was yet another stone tablet. Holding onto a night illumination pearl, Xing Yuan walked forward, and under a dim yellow light, he saw 3 large words inscribed on it, Burying Sorrow Lodge. This. Seeing the words on it, the group blinked in astonishment. Was this the name of the underground chamber as well? Does this place have 2 names? Yearning Abode Lodge previously, and Burying Sorrow Lodge now, what exactly was the true name of this place? These 3 words are calm and upright. Only by finding joy again can one abandon sorrow. This means that there's something inside that he seeks which can help him to overcome his sadness. Yi Qian took a look and analyzed the words. If I'm not mistaken, these must be the words left behind by those who imprisoned Grandmaster Wu Yangzi. You're right. Since they had imprisoned Grandmaster Wu Yangzi to forge weapons or artifacts for them, naturally, they would be overjoyed enough to forget even their sorrows. Xing Yuan nodded. Luo Qiqi and Princess Fei hesitated for a moment before nodding in agreement as well. This was the most plausible explanation for the entire matter. Just that, they still couldn't understand why there was a stone tablet with different inscribing on each end of the bridge. After looking at the stone tablet, they took a look around the hall. However, it was entirely empty, and there was nothing to be seen at all. Let me take a look. Wu Zhen walked around the walls, knocking on them as he passed them by, but he soon shook his head and said, there isn't any mechanism here. Could there be a hidden formation then? With a formation compass in hand, Princess Fei also explored the area, but her face slowly darkened. There isn't any formation here either. It can't be that this is it to the underground chamber. Everyone frowned. Given the effort made to set up such a formidable hidden formation outside, dig out this deep underground chamber, setting up the ventilation, and drawing a river in here, all there was here was this big hall. If that was the case, wouldn't this be way too pointless? With just this empty hall, we won't be able to determine whether Wu Yangzi once lived here or not. If that's the case, it means that our mission is a failure. Luo Qiqi frowned. She had confidence in Wu Zhen and Princess Fei's capabilities. Since the both of them said that there was nothing here, that was likely to be the case. However, given that this area was completely empty, there was nothing they could use to gauge whether Wu Yangzi had been here or not. How were they supposed to report this matter when they return? What was even more bizarre was that if there was nothing here, where in the world did those weapons that were forged using Grandmaster Wu Yangzi's unique forging technique come from? Indeed. To think that all we would see was a mere empty hall after all the effort we took coming here. Xing Yuan also shook his head in disappointment. He thought that they would be able to find some clues by coming here, but there was nothing more than 2 stone tablets and a small bridge here. Was their mission destined to end in failure? Just as everyone was shaking their heads in disappointment, Luo Qiqi suddenly said, "Teacher, did you manage to discern anything at all?" Everyone quickly shifted their gazes, only to see that Zhang Xian was standing before the second stone tablet once more. The latter stretched out his hand and touched the tablet. Zhang Xian turned around and said, "I find that there's something very bizarre with these 2 stone tablets." Bizarre? Everyone walked forward and gathered around the stone tablets once more. Zhang Xian revealed his deduction. Yearning Abode Lodge and Burying Sorrow Lodge. If I'm not mistaken, it should represent 2 different roads. The words left on the stone tablets are probably a choice offered to those who stumble upon this area. Now that you say it, that does seem possible. Everyone was taken aback. Of the entire underground chamber, the most conspicuous objects were the stone tablets. Perhaps, there was some kind of mechanism hidden within it. Let me take a look. Wu Zhen hesitated for a moment before walking up. He took out a night illumination pearl and carefully studied the stone tablet. Suddenly his eyes lit up. There does seem to be a mechanism hidden in here. A mechanism? Perhaps this mechanism will open up a passageway that lead us to another location. In other words, we are only at the entrance of the underground chamber. Everyone's interest was immediately piqued, and they hurried forward to the tablet to take a look as well. Chapter 658. Indecipherable. Since there was a mechanism on the stone tablet, there was a good chance that the place they were in wasn't the real underground chamber. Perhaps, there might be a passageway leading to it, just that they hadn't found it yet. Teacher's eye of discernment is indeed formidable. Luo Qiqi turned to look at Zhang Xian with eyes shining in admiration. Indeed, she did well pulling her teacher along with them. His eye of discernment was proving to be incomparably valuable at this timing. Otherwise, they would surely still be wasting their time, looking around futilely. Seeing her good friend admiring Zhang Shi, Yu Feier pouted in displeasure and harumphed. He's just lucky. Even though she knew that Zhang Shi possessed extraordinary capability, she still couldn't help but feel a little displeased when she saw the other party doing well. Zhang Xian turned to look at her and asked, "Lucky? Do you want to bet with me then?" You. Nearly choking on her saliva, Yu Feier gritted her teeth and turned her head away. Knowing that it was best not to interfere in the conflict between the two, the previous time, he was pummeled due to it, Wu Zhen turned a blind eye to it. He hurried over to the stone tablet and said, "Let me see if I can decipher the mechanism." Closing his eyes tightly, he began feeling the tablet lightly with his fingers. Since it was a mechanism, there must be a core controlling it. With his deep understanding of mechanisms as a celestial designer, he should be able to analyze its inner workings through the minor differences on its surface and find its weakness. Everyone, be silent. He needs to concentrate hard to find the core. As long as he finds it, he should be able to break open this mechanism without any trouble. Xing Yuan said. While the mechanisms created by celestial designers were formidable, they had their flaws as well. There was no mechanism that couldn't work without a core to power it, and once one finds it, even the most difficult of mechanisms could be undone easily. Understanding this, everyone nodded and fell silent. In an instant, the only sound that could be heard in the area was the torrent beneath the bridge. Controlling his breathing and heartbeat, Wu Zhen drove his Jinqi to make his touch even more sensitive. He quickly felt his way around the entire stone tablet, and after contemplating for a moment, he abruptly opened his eyes. "All right, I've found the core. I should be able to open the underground chamber now." Wu Zhen chuckled with deep confidence. His cultivation might not be on par with Xing Yuan, Luo Qiqi, and Princess Feier, but he had the absolute confidence in dealing with mechanisms. It was finally his turn to shine. Taking a deep breath, he shook the 1,000 utility umbrella in his hand. Voila! A sharp needle suddenly appeared at the top of the umbrella. The needle was around 3 centimeters long, and under the warm glow of the night illumination pearl it emanated a fearsome cold gleam. With just a look, one could tell that it was extremely sharp. This is the 1000 utility thorn of the 1000 utility umbrella. It's used to decipher all kinds of mechanisms. Just for this thorn, 5 5-star blacksmiths would have to work tirelessly for 10 days to successfully forge it. Luo Qiqi explained. 5 5-star blacksmiths would have to work tirelessly for 10 days. Zhang Xian was shocked. This sharp needle that was as thin as a strand of hair actually required so much effort behind it. But thinking about it, crafting such a sharp and narrow needle couldn't possibly be an easy task. After all, the narrower it was, the more prone it would be to breaking. Luo Qiqi continued explaining. It is only because he's a master teacher that he could mobilize so many blacksmiths at once. If it had been anybody else, it would have been impossible to hire them for such a laborious job. Zhang Xian nodded. As the #1 occupation in the world, being a master teacher did have lots of benefits. There was only benefits that stood to be gained from getting acquainted with a young and talented 5-star master teacher. Thus, it wasn't too hard for Wu Zhen to get 5 5-star blacksmiths to spend 10 whole days to craft a weapon for him. If it had been any other occupation, that would have been impossible. Wang. While they were speaking, the aura around Wu Zhen suddenly surged, and his eyes widened. The 1000 utility umbrella abruptly stabbed the side of the tablet diagonally. Ding! As soon as the 1000 needle utility came into contact with the stone tablet, it seemed to sink into a small crack that was so small that one couldn't even see it with one's eyes. G. Some heavy creaking noises sounded from the stone tablet, as though it was grinding against the floor. Upon hearing this noise, Wu Zhen's confident face suddenly darkened, and he hurriedly shouted, "Darn it, be careful." However, before he could finish his words, a storm-like noise suddenly came from the stone tablet, and countless sharp needles shot out from it. Each of the needles moved at an exceptionally fast speed, and while it wouldn't be fatal were it to hit, it could cause one a fair bit of suffering. Voila! Wu Zhen immediately pressed a point on the 1000 utility umbrella, and it opened up. The cloth of the 1000 utility umbrella was forged using a unique material, making it as resilient as a shield. Putting aside these needles, even a sharp weapon couldn't hope to tear through it. If not for such incredible functionalities, the 1000 utility umbrella wouldn't be an artifact so well loved by celestial designers such that they would go to the extent of bankruptcy just to have one forged. Ding ding dang dang. The resilient umbrella managed to deflect most of the needles, but there were still some which slipped through its defense. Retreat. Stepping forward, Xing Yuan flicked his wrist and took out a shield. Knowing that underground chambers were usually filled with mechanisms and traps, he had brought many things in preparations for the various circumstances they could face. This shield was both 2 meters in height and width, and it could easily cover everyone behind. Hoo-la-la. With a sound reminiscent of rain pattering on banana leaves, the thin needles were stopped in their tracks. Quite a few of them ended up lodging themselves into the ground and the shield. That was close. Seeing the dense congregation of needles on the ground and the shield, everyone felt cold sweat trickling down their backs. If not for Xing Yuan preparing this in advance, they would have been turned into pincushions. They would probably be wishing that they would be dead even though the attack wasn't fatal. Wiping the cold sweat off his forehead, Xing Yuan turned to Wu Zhen and bellowed furiously. "Are you trying to open the underground chamber or are you trying to murder us? You were supposed to decipher the mechanism, not to murder us. If we had reacted any slower than that, we would have been done in just now." In fact, despite his swift reaction, he was still pierced by 5 small needles. He couldn't control the overwhelming rage bubbling within him. It was just a moment ago that the other party confidently declared that he had solved it when such a matter occurred. Can't you look properly before piercing your umbrella into that mechanism? Knowing that he was at fault, Wu Zhen's lips twitched. Every single mechanism will have some intentional flaws installed to serve as traps to prevent others from deciphering it successfully. I picked the wrong one just now. Don't worry, I won't make any mistake this time. Closing the 1000 utility umbrella, he closed his eyes and began feeling the stone tablet once more. Finally, he confirmed another point, and he declared with a look of confidence, "This is definitely right this time around." "Are you certain?" The face of a doubtful Xing Yuan appeared from the back of the shield. "I'm certain. If I'm mistaken this time again, I'll cut my head off." Wu Zhen gritted his teeth, and without any hesitation, he pierced the 1000 utility thorn into it once more. He was determined to succeed this time to cleanse off the humiliation from his failure, as well as to prove himself. Hong Long. Ji ya. The 1000 utility thorns struck the stone tablet, and the heavy creaking sound echoed once more. This time, before Wu Zhen could say anything, countless thin needles shot out once more. Wu Zhen's face paled. At this point, he was already on the verge of crying. "I clearly checked it multiple times, how could I possibly be wrong?" While Wu Zhen was in disbelief, Xing Yuan was on the verge of explosion. Tearing away needles from his face, he howled. "You're courting death. Are you sure you are sufficiently capable? Can't you have at least given us a warning before you pierced the stone tablet? My head is still outside, you know. If not for me using my Jinqi to ward off the might of the needles, who knows what could have happened to me now. But even so, having an entire face full of needles as though a porcupine had made him frenzied. Can't you be a little careful and aim for the correct point? 2 consecutive failures, are you really trying to pull everyone down to their graves along with you? Don't worry. I'll surely get it right the next time." Plucking away a few silver needles from his head, Wu Zhen's lips twitched in frenzy. He closed the 1000 utility umbrella once more and began feeling the stone tablet. After a long time, he paused, and gritting his teeth, he said, "I'm sure that it's this one, no mistake about it." "Are you very certain?" Xing Yuan asked questioningly. "I'm very certain." Xing Yuan nodded. "All right. Do it then." Xing Yuan swiftly hid behind the shield, concealing his entire body behind it. Even though this fellow had spoken confidently, he had also done the same the 2 previous times. After triggering the trap consecutively, he would be a fool to not seek cover. Gritting his teeth, Wu Zhen held up his 1000 utility thorn and pierced the stone. Ji-ya. This time, it wasn't the sound of heavy creaking but the melodic tune of gears turning. "Ha, I succeeded. There's surely no problem this time." Hearing this sound, Wu Zhen's eyes lit up, and he quickly turned around to share his joy. "That's more like it." Heaving a sigh of relief, Xing Yuan's head peeked out from the umbrella. Given the difference in noise, the other party should have gotten it right this time. Voila! As soon as his head peeked out, a storm-like noise resounded in the air once more, and innumerable flying thin needles appeared in his sight. The heck! Xing Yuan was on the verge of crying. "Big brother, will you only be content after you get rid of me? Didn't you say that you had succeeded? If you really had succeeded, what's with these thin needles?" In truth, Wu Zhen felt even more frenzied than him at this very moment. He clearly heard the cogs of the mechanism turning, why would it still shoot out thin needles? Even though he had opened the 1000 utility umbrella in time to ward off the majority of them, due to his slower reaction from having his guard down, he was still pierced by dozens of needles. The places stabbed by the needles swelled red, creating quite a glaring sight. "Xing Yuan, it's not that I want to kill you, but that this mechanism wants to kill the both of us." "I got it." After a long moment, after Wu Zhen finally plucked out the thin needles from his body, he suddenly thought of something and his mouth twitched. "This seems to be a Grade 6 mechanism set up by a 6-star celestial designer." Grade 6 mechanism? Everyone staggered. If it was a Grade 6 mechanism, what the hell were you doing up there? As a 5-star celestial designer, You should know better than to make such an elementary mistake. Knowing what everyone was thinking, Wu Zhen hurriedly explained himself. It is because there's a booby trap contained within the grade 6 mechanism. A booby trap. Using some special means, this grade 6 mechanism is disguised as a grade 5, and fake flaws were installed on them to lure others to trigger them. Furthermore, there are different sounds to triggering these flaws to beguile those attempting to decipher it, thus putting their guards down momentarily. I've only seen this kind of mechanism in some books once, and I thought its heritage had already died out. Who knew that? I would actually find one here. Wu Zhen's face paled. This booby-trapped mechanism was designed so exquisitely that even a 6-star celestial designer could possibly fall into the trap, not to mention him. As an occupation specializing in the crafting of mechanisms, celestial designers had a unique heritage, and it was an occupation recognized by the Master-Teacher Pavilion. There was a significant difference between the knowledge or capability of those in between every single rank. As a 5-star primary celestial designer, it was perfectly normal that he would be unable to see through the booby-trapped mechanism of a grade 6 mechanism. It was fortunate that limited by the disguise, it was impossible to fill the stone tablets with anything stronger than the needles. Otherwise, they would have been dead by now. Seeing the other party's depressed expression, Luo Qiqi asked, in other words, you can't decipher it, right? If I said that I could decipher it, would you allow me to continue? Wu Zhen asked. Everyone swiftly shook their heads. Xing Yuan gritted his teeth and said, if you dare to continue deciphering it, do you believe that I won't kill you right now? You must be joking. Even though I am really interested in opening the pathway to the true underground chamber, I still don't want to die yet. Putting everything aside, after only 3 attempts at deciphering the stone tablet, his face was already swollen due to those needles. If this were to continue, he would probably die before the tablet was deciphered. Then what should we do? Since they weren't able to decipher the mechanism, they couldn't possibly just wait here for their entire lives. Let me give it a try. Seeing the look of frustration on everyone's faces, Zhang Xian stepped forward. When he touched the stone tablet previously, a book had already been compiled in the Library of Heaven's Path on it. It wasn't that he was interested in seeing Wu Zhen make a fool of himself, but that the complex mechanisms contained within the stone tablet were simply too fascinating that he found himself absorbed into it. By the time he had come to, Xing Yuan's face was already filled with silver needles. You? Seeing him step forth, Wu Zhen frowned and asked, are you well versed in the ways of a celestial designer as well? Given how formidable this fellow was in pill forging and formations, he couldn't possibly be an expert in mechanisms as well. While celestial designers weren't as prestigious as formation masters and apothecaries, it didn't impede the ingenuity of their craft. Their work was extremely complex and difficult to master. Even the slightest deviation in the details could cause a vast difference in the results, and in this occupation, he could be considered as a rare genius already. Even so, despite his years of study, he had only reached 5-star. Considering how even he was unable to solve it, a fellow who was younger than him. It couldn't be that the other party was more capable than him. But that was impossible. Zhang Xian chuckled. I dabble. Dabble? Wu Zhen shook his head. If you only dabble, it will surely be impossible for you to decipher it. You witnessed the situation just now, even the slightest mistake will trigger the silver needle mechanism. There was no poison on the needles previously, so we were still able to get by, but what if the needles from now on are coated with lethal poison? If that happens, none of us will get out of here. So, if you don't have absolute confidence in your ability to decipher it, it'll be best not to give it a try. I fear that we might all die here. Seeing Wu Zhen obstructing his path, Zhang Xian shook his head. Absolute confidence? Aren't you the same too? Despite not being completely sure, didn't you try 3 times? Still able to get by. Why don't you ask Xing Yuan whether he agrees with your words? Let's see, he would surely pummel you to the ground if you were to utter such words before him. Humph, how could I be the same? I'm from a family of celestial designers, and I created my own automated mechanism when I was 3. By 17, I was already a 4-star celestial designer, and after I entered Hongyuan Academy, I became the student of the only 6-star pinnacle celestial designer within the empire. Flinging his sleeves, Wuzhen raised his head proudly. Even though I've failed 3 times, that doesn't mean that I'm unconfident. Even though this is a booby-trapped mechanism from a 6-star celestial designer, as long as I attempt it a few more times, I'm certain that I can decipher it. But if you really insist on going ahead, there's little I can do to stop you either. How about this, why don't I ask you 2 basic questions, and if you can answer them, it will mean that you do possess some basic knowledge regarding celestial designers, and that you aren't just fooling about. Wuzhen turned to look at him. Zhang Xian came to a halt. Who is the most famous celestial designer in the past 10,000 years of Hongyuan Empire? Wuzhen asked. This. Zhang Xian scratched his head in confusion. He had barely read any books on celestial designers, so how could he possibly know who the most famous celestial designer in Hongyuan Empire was? Besides, he didn't even know the name of the incumbent emperor of Hongyuan Empire was nor the name of the Master Teacher Academy's principal, so how could he know anything about that? You don't even know this? Seeing the embarrassed look on the other party, Wuzhen frowned. Since that's the case, I don't think you know who is the one who created the concept of a booby-trapped mechanism then? I don't. Zhang Xian shook his head. I'm just going to decipher the stone tablets. What do the questions you asked have to do with it? Of course, it has everything to do with it. Hearing Zhang Xian's words, Wuzhen's eyes flashed in disappointment. This is the most basic knowledge that every celestial designer knows, and the fact that you don't know it means that you don't know a thing about the occupation. How are you supposed to find the core and decipher the mechanism like that? I don't deny that you do possess a unique interpretation of pill forging and formation, but mechanism is something very much different from that. One cannot solve it with confidence alone. Why don't I tell you about the origin and fundamental theories regarding mechanisms so that you can understand the complexity of the subject? By then, you can consider once more if you really intend to continue on. The more Wuzhen spoke, the more Zhang Xian felt that calluses would start growing on his ears. Bored of the other party, he stepped toward to the stone tablet, flicked his wrist, and took out the glacier rain sword. What are you doing? This is a mechanism. Using a sword against it will only draw more aggression onto ourselves. Just as Wuzhen was rambling on, he saw the other party draw a sword, and he nearly fainted from anger. Are you kidding me? Due to the small parts of the mechanism, there was very little room for any error. That was the reason why I had to search the stone tablet so thoroughly for the core before using the 1000 umbrella thorn to pierce it precisely. And yet, you actually took out a sword? Are you for real? Just as he was thinking that the other party was just causing needless trouble, the young man before him seemed to have heard his words of advice and put his sword away. That's more like it. Just as Wuzhen was thinking that fellow was still acceptable given how receptive he was to advise, the other party flicked his wrist and whipped out a huge hammer. The hammer was even larger than the ones used by blacksmiths to forge weapons. It was on par with those used by workers on construction sites. On top of that, its material was also subpar. It was hard to understand why a master teacher like Zhang Xian would have such a weapon on him. What are you going to do? Wuzhen was so shocked that he was even starting to stutter, but seemingly paying him no heed, the young man before him raised his metal hammer and smashed it against the stone tablet. The heck? Wuzhen's sight darkened, and a stifled sensation welled up in his chest. In that instant, he felt an urge to spew blood. Even when using the 1000 utility thorn, he nearly ended up being killed by the onslaught of needles. Yet, you actually used a metal hammer to strike it. Even if you're seeking death, that's not the way to do it. Wu Zhen opened his 1,000 utility umbrella in a panic and hid behind it as though a quail, not daring to move at all. Following which, a sound reminiscent to a grandfather clock reverberated in the room, sending goosebumps up the skin of others. Kacha! Kacha! A series of crisp clicks sounded, as though an egg being peeled of its shell, and everything fell silent. Just as Wu Zhen was doubtful why there were no needles shooting over this time, he suddenly heard the nonchalant voice of the young man from the stone tablet. "All right, the passageway has opened." He carefully emerged from the back of his 1,000 utility umbrella, and upon taking a glance, he suddenly froze. This. His eyes widened as though he had seen a ghost. The stone tablet before him had disappeared entirely from view, and in its place was a huge stone door and a series of stone steps, leading downward, toward the bottom of the stream not too far away. "It's open." Not just him, Luo Qiqi and Xing Yuan were stunned as well. A famed 5-star celestial designer of the academy had gone through so much trouble and triggered the trap multiple times, only to fail miserably. And yet, this fellow simply smacked it hard with a metal hammer and it was immediately deciphered. Wasn't there something very wrong about this? Was Wu Zhen the 5-star celestial designer, or was Zhang Shi? After a moment of shock, Luo Qiqi said, "The true underground chamber lies beneath the stream. It's no wonder we can't find the source of the ventilation despite the smooth air currents here." When she first discovered that the air in this room was fresh, she tried looking for the source of ventilation, but to her surprise, she couldn't find it at all. However, with the revelation of the underground passageway, she finally came to a realization: the secret lay beneath the stream. The fresh air in the underground chamber originated from the stream. Princess Euphair nodded. "Since we managed to find the underground chamber, let's hurry down and check if this place is related to Grandmaster Wu Yangzi." Even though she detested Zhang Xian, she had to admit that the other party did possess extraordinary capability. There were simply too many things that had happened for her to deny it. "The underground chamber may have opened, but I think we shouldn't go in yet," Zhang Xian said. "Why?" Princess Euphair turned her sight to him. Given that there was such an elaborate mechanism hiding an underground chamber, the answers they sought were probably inside. Since what they were looking for were right before them, why shouldn't they enter? "All in all, we have seen a total of 2 stone tablets on both sides of the bridge. One is marked with Yearning Abode Lodge while the other bearing Sorrow Lodge. I think that there's another pathway hidden in the other stone tablet, so we should make a decision before entering," Zhang Xian explained. Since an underground passageway was found in one of the 2 stone tablets, perhaps the same could be said for the other as well. "That's right." The group nodded. Blinded by their excitement in uncovering the stone tablet, they neglected this point. Thinking of it, it was indeed highly possible that another passageway hid behind the other stone tablet. If that was really the case, then Zhang Xian's conjecture would be spot on: 2 names, 2 choices. What we should do now is decipher the other stone tablet before making a decision. Seeing that everyone had realized what he was talking about, Zhang Xian nodded in agreement. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly felt his hand being relieved of the weight in it. Someone had taken the metal hammer from his hand. Following which, an impassive voice spoke. "I'll decipher the stone tablet over there." By the time Zhang Xian lifted his gaze, Wu Zhen was already at the other side of the bridge. Lifting the metal hammer up, he smashed it powerfully on the stone tablet. That fellow was too desperate to prove himself. Despite being a 5-star celestial designer, he failed to decipher the mechanism behind the stone tablet despite 3 attempts. Yet, an amateur actually opened it with a smash of a metal hammer. The embarrassment and frustration he felt was understandable. However, there stood another stone tablet for him to redeem himself and prove his own capability. How could he possibly just give up this opportunity to showcase his ability to the other party? Thus, he snatched the hammer and rushed over immediately. Recalling the direction, trajectory, and might of the other party's hammer strike, he bellowed loudly and smashed the hammer down onto the stone tablet. B. Not expecting the other party to move so quickly, Zhang Xian was taken aback. Before he could finish his words, the sound of heavy grinding sounded from the stone tablet at the opposite side of the river. Following which, a whole rain of thin needles came flying forth. Puha! 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 Unprepared, Wu Zhen didn't even manage to open the 1,000 utility umbrella before the rain of needles blurred his vision. In an instant, he turned into a cactus. Careful, Zhang Xian uttered, as he stared at the sight before him. Chapter 660, Another Bet. Wu Zhen cried silently. I really only wanted to prove myself. Who in the world did I offend for this to become of me? Even though he had exerted his jinqi at the final moment to protect his vitals, he was still pierced by several hundred needles. Furthermore, each of them had pierced at least an inch deep, leaving him in deep pain. What is the use of saying be careful now? Didn't you use the metal hammer to smash the stone tablet just now as well? Why didn't it work for me? The same location, the same strength, and the same technique, and yet, you opened up a passageway whereas I transformed into a human cactus. Tears streamed down Wu Zhen's face as he trembled in indignation. Driving his jinqi through his body, he flexed his muscles, and the needles lodged into his flesh were immediately jolted out. With a flick of his wrist, he took out the wine gourd he received from Zhang Xian. As Princess Fei didn't use it all back then, he still had a portion of the Saint Recovery medicine. Since he was wounded all over at the moment, this was the perfect time to use it. Since this is an external wound. Wu Zhen deduced the logic behind Zhang Shi's words before uncorking the cap and pouring the wine all over his body. On the opposite side of the river, Zhang Xian's lips twitched upon seeing the sight. Cough cough. Of course, he remembered this wine. He had no choice but to feign it as a gift due to Luo Zhao, Feng Yu, and Chen Yu cornering Heng Shi back then. The basis behind its healing property was Heaven's Path Jinqi, but considering how a few days had passed, the Jinqi contained within the wine had already long dried out. In other words, what was within the gourd was just ordinary wine, and to pour alcohol on such gaping wound would surely be excruciating. Ah! While Zhang Xian was still in his thoughts, the sound of a pig being butchered echoed in the air. Wu Zhen's entire body convulsed as though it had been shocked. In terms of pain, rubbing alcohol on one's wounds was really not much different from rubbing salt on them. The immense suffering that he felt threatened to steal his consciousness away from him. Watching as white foam started pouring out from the edges of the other party's mouth, Zhang Xian immediately instructed, Little Qi, quickly feed him a recovery pill. Otherwise, I fear that he might just die. Yes. Luo Qiqi quickly rushed over, pinched open the other party's mouth, and fed him a recovery pill. Only with the consumption of the recovery pill did the other party's complexion finally recover slightly. While the needles weren't fatal, there were simply too many of them. Not to mention, the alcohol also had other ingredients in it that would only aggravate one's wounds. Thus, even though Wu Zhen had managed to survive the ordeal with the help of the recovery pill, he was in terrible shape. His vision was a little unclear, his face was entirely swollen, and he felt listless. Standing up, he shot a glare at Zhang Shi and began weeping silently. You liar! Be it the metal hammer striking the stone tablet or the Saint Recovery medicine. I must have been a fool to trust you. Allow me. Not expecting Wu Zhen to be so rash as to rush to the other stone tablet without allowing him to finish his words, Zhang Xian shook his head helplessly. Along with Xing Yuan and the others, he walked over to the other side. He took the 1,000 utility umbrella from Wu Zhen's hands, and with a flick of his wrist, the 1,000 utility thorn appeared. Then, he aimed it at the stone tablet before him and stabbed it in. Ding ding ding. 3 crisp mechanical clicks sounded. Jia! Jia! The stone tablet slowly split apart, revealing a towering door. Aren't you supposed to use the metal hammer? Wu Zhen staggered at that sight. Ah! Adaptability is a very important in deciphering mechanisms. The 1000 utility thorn works perfectly fine on this stone tablet. Zhang Xian said. Wu Zhen. Ignoring Wu Zhen, who was on the verge of a breakdown, the group walked over to the entrance. Within it was a flight of stone stairs leading to the bottom of the stream as well, but the direction was the complete opposite to the other passageways. Most likely, the two passageways led to different places. There are indeed 2 underground chambers. A grim expression appeared on everyone's face. At that moment, the surface of the bridge not too far away from them shook, and the sound of cogs whirring into action echoed through the chamber. A cold voice abruptly boomed. Congratulations for opening the 2 entrances. However, each one of you can only choose one door to enter. You'll have an incense's time to choose, and once you make your choice, retreat is no longer an option. Knowing the importance of this matter, Wu Zhen put aside his grudges and began explaining. It's mechanical recorder. Mechanical recorder. Everyone was confused. On top of creating traps reminiscent of formations, there are some formidable mechanisms that are capable of recording human speech as well. Upon triggering it, the voice recorded within will play, Wu Zhen explained. I see. Zhang Xian was surprised, but his astonishment didn't last for too long. There were plenty of similar gadgets in his previous life as well. For example, the music box consisted of various mechanisms to play a specific melody. Given the incredible technology celestial designers wielded, it shouldn't be too difficult for them to create a machine that could emulate human speech. Interrupting Wu Zhen, Princess Yufei said, now isn't the time to be bothering about that, let's discuss which passageway we should choose instead. The group nodded. The trigger to the recorded voice was probably the opening of both entrances. According to the words from the voice in the mechanical recorder, they had to choose between the 2 entrances within an incense's time. They hardly had the luxury to be thinking about anything else at the moment. After a moment of hesitation, Luo Qiqi revealed her own conjecture. From the words left behind on the stone tablets, it should be clear how we should choose. On this side is Yearning Abode Lodge, which is highly likely to reflect Grandmaster Wu Yangzi's nostalgia for his own homeland. Since that's the case, it's likely to be the underground chamber where Grandmaster Wu Yangzi lived in. On the other hand, Burying Sorrow Lodge is likely to refer to the place where those who confined Grandmaster Wu Yangzi here lived. I agree with Qiqi's point of view. Princess Yufei nodded. Xing Yuan, Wu Zhen, and Yi Qian also expressed their approval of that view. They had agreed on this conclusion as soon as they saw the stone tablets, so it wasn't too hard for them to agree with Luo Qiqi's point of view. Frowning, Zhang Xian said, I have an alternative point of view. May I know what teacher thinks of this matter? Luo Qiqi turned her eyes over. The others also gathered their gazes on Zhang Xian. This young man had displayed outstanding performance ever since their arrival, so no one dared to take his words lightly anymore. Contrary to your perspective, I feel that Burying Sorrow Lodge is where Grandmaster Wu Yangzi lived instead. As for the reason, I can't really put it out in words for you all. Zhang Xian said. Touching the stone tablet only showed Zhang Xian the mechanisms hidden within it. It didn't explain the interior of the underground chamber within and whether it had anything to do with Wu Yangzi or not. As such, this conclusion actually came from his own hypothesis, and there was no concrete evidence behind it. How can that be? Princess Fei's lips curled up into a sneer, and she harumphed coldly. Captured by others to become a weapon-forging machine, Grandmaster Wu Yangzi is surely filled with indignation and wrath. How could he possibly bury his sorrows under such circumstances? Indeed. Captured, Grandmaster Wu Yangzi would surely be missing his own homeland. I agree with Sixth Princess's view. Xing Yuan nodded. Knowing that her teacher wouldn't raise claims without any basis behind them, Luo Qiqi asked, Teacher, for you to say so, could it be that you have noticed something peculiar? I didn't notice anything out of ordinary, just that I am a little perplexed by the killing intent contained within the words, yearning abode lodge. I have some understanding of painting, and I find it hard to believe that those words were left behind by a grandmaster blacksmith. On the other hand, the words, burying sorrow lodge, seemed to emanate calmness and contained a far deeper intent into it. It felt more like the work of a grandmaster. That is the reason why I think so. Zhang Xian said. I got the same feeling as well. Yi Qian interjected. As a 5-star painter, he also felt similar intents from the 2 inscriptions on the stone tablets. Like we said before, it's normal for there to be killing intent infused into his words. Captured and imprisoned, it would only be bizarre if he didn't have such emotions. Burying sorrow lodge. Hee, probably only those who captured him could live their days happily without any sorrow. Princess Fair shook her head. I'll still choose this passageway. From the very start, she harbored a great dislike for Zhang Xian. Seeing that there was no strong basis behind the other party's words, her confidence began to increase. I also choose this passageway. Xing Yuan nodded. He would follow Princess Fair no matter where she went. Besides, he also thought that her words were more reasonable at the moment. Princess Fair turned to Wu Zhen. What about you? After a moment of hesitation, Wu Zhen nodded and replied, I'll choose here as well. He also felt that Princess Fair's words were correct. Seeing another person standing on her side, Princess Fair felt as though she was finally going to achieve victory over the other party. Delighted, she turned to the Crown Prince and asked, Yi Qian, what about you? I agree more with Zhang Shi's words. Yi Qian replied, but halfway through, he suddenly noticed the eyebrows of the princess in front of him shooting up all of the sudden, and his courage immediately faded. However, I'll still choose this passageway. That's more like it. Seeing her junior supporting her as well, Princess Fair nodded her head in satisfaction. She turned to Zhang Xian with a triumphant look and said, all right, 4 of the 6 have made their decisions. What about you? Aren't you good at betting? Let's see how you'll win this time. I'll still choose the passageway on the opposite end. Before the other party's provocation, Zhang Xian could only shake his head. Turning to Luo Qiqi, he asked, what about you? Luo Qiqi hesitated for a while before eventually replying, I'll follow teacher. Qiqi. Not expecting her close friend to actually betray her at such a moment, Yu Fei hurried forward and tried to persuade her otherwise. Don't you agree with our deduction as well? That passageway definitely has nothing to do with Grandmaster Wu Yangzi at all. Hearing the other party spouting such words, Zhang Xian interjected with a smile. Definitely. You sure sound certain. Do you dare to bet on it? Of course. Yu Fei flung her sleeves majestically. She possessed absolute confidence regarding this. Good. With so many people witnessing this, I doubt that you would refuse to pay up. This time, instead of 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones, the bet will be 1 high-tier spirit stone instead. Zhang Xian chuckled lightly. The victory will be decided by which passageway leads to Grandmaster Wu Yangzi's living quarters. If the path I chose is correct, you'll have to pay me 1 high-tier spirit stone. On the other hand, I'll relieve you of your duties as my maid, and we'll owe each another nothing. Fine. But if you lose, not only must you relieve me as your maid, you must also repay the 700 middle-tier spirit stones back to me. Also. Princess Yu Fei gritted her teeth. You must also serve me wine. Sure, I'll serve you wine if you win. Zhang Xian nodded. It's a deal then. Princess Yu Fei sneered coldly, just you wait. Let's go. After which, she began walking into the stone passageway. Xing Yuan, Yi Qian, and Wu Zhen followed closely behind her. Let's go as well. Seeing them walking down the stone stairs, Zhang Xian beckoned Luo Qiqi, and the duo crossed the bridge and descended down into the other passageway. Chapter 661, An arm. A dark world lay behind the stone door. Luo Qiqi stepped forward and hurled a few night illumination pearls down to light up the interior. The further the duo walked down the stairs, the louder the flow of the stream above them sounded. Even though they were beneath a stream, it didn't feel humid at all. On the contrary, it felt extremely dry. On top of that, the air seemed to be getting fresher and richer in spiritual energy. The spiritual energy is drawn in from the stream above. Most probably, a unique spirit gathering formation was inscribed on top, Luo Qiqi uttered with a hushed voice as she studied the surroundings. Zhang Xian nodded. By building a huge spirit gathering formation in the river, they would be able to draw in spiritual energy from the surface discreetly. With this influx of spiritual energy, this underground chamber would become an excellent location to cultivate in. Jia. However, a moment after they walked in, they heard the sound of something crashing down above them. Looking upward, they realized that the opening from the entrance where they came from had disappeared. This is bad. Their faces darkened, and they hurriedly rushed back to the entrance. However, some kind of mechanism had already sealed the entrance tightly. This is a dragon severing lock which only 6-star celestial designers can forge. Luo Qiqi's face paled. A grave expression surfaced on Zhang Xian. It seems like the other party meant it when he said that we would only get a single chance at choosing the passageway. Once the dragon severing lock is in place, even a 6-star celestial designer would be troubled to overcome it. No one amongst us would be able to get in or out. They didn't take the voice on the stone bridge seriously, thinking that it was just a figure of speech. Who knew that he would actually be serious about it? He had encountered the dragon severing lock back at the Soul Oracle tomb as well. Once this artifact was in place, unless one possessed the might rivaling a transcendent mortal 9-dan cultivator, one would never be able to overcome it. On top of that, for some reason, the dragon severing lock installed here seemed to be much stronger than the one in the Soul Oracle tomb, making it even more impossible for them to bypass it. In other words, they were both trapped in this underground chamber. Luo Qiqi turned to look at Zhang Xian anxiously. Teacher, what should we do now? Even though she was a feared genius among her fellow peers, before Zhang Shi, she felt as ignorant as a child. For some reason, she found herself developing a dependency on the other party, and it felt as though the ideas that came out from the other party's mind would always be the best. If not for this deep trust in the other party, she wouldn't have chosen to follow Zhang Shi despite feeling that Yu Feier's words were more logical. Frowning, Zhang Xian replied, since we can only pick one passageway, it means that the other passageway where Xing Yuan and the others are must be locked as well. Let's just advance for now. Perhaps there might be another exit here. Luo Qiqi nodded in agreement. Thus, the duo continued downward. Soon, they arrived at an average-sized room. Under the illumination of the night illumination pearls, they could see that there was a stone table and 2 stone chairs in here, a very simple layout. There were no windows or doors here. They had come to the end of the path. So small. Luo Qiqi frowned. The hall they were in previously spanned over a few hundred square meters, so they thought that the underground chamber below here should at least be larger. Who knew that it would only be around 20 square meters, not to mention, empty. Rather than an underground chamber, it felt like a cage instead. We're at the end. Could it be that I've really picked the wrong passageway? Zhang Xian's complexion also turned rather awful. He didn't pick this road on a whim, but judging from the narrow room and the lack of any further passage for them to walk down on, could his instincts have truly failed him? Were they doomed to die here? Looking around, Zhang Xian suppressed his anxiety and said, regardless of whether I am mistaken or not, judging from how deep the underground chamber is, and the effort put into installing the dragon severing lock, it's not logical for the passageway to end with this small room. There must be some kind of trick to this room. Dragon severing lock was an extremely valuable artifact, even for a 6-star celestial designer. Putting aside the technology required to install it, just the resilient material that made it difficult for even a normal saint to break it was incomparably expensive in itself. It truly didn't make sense to use such a valuable object to seal a passageway just to have such a small room at the very end of it. I'll try looking around. Luo Qiqi nodded. She walked to the stone table and touched it, but she instantly withdrew her fingers with a shocked expression. There's no dust at all. Astonished, Zhang Xian rushed up and touched the table as well. His face immediately turned grim. The stone table and stone chairs had been here for innumerable years, and yet, there wasn't the slightest dust to be found on them. It was as if someone had dusted them regularly. Could it be that someone actually lives here? Luo Qiqi narrowed her eyes. It was one thing for a voice to be recorded on a mechanical recorder, but if someone was alive, that would change the essence of things. First and foremost, they would be in even graver danger than before. This was a power that could even kidnap the 6-star pinnacle blacksmith Wu Yangzi alive. Their true strength was unimaginable. If someone were to be alive, given the current cultivation realms of the duo, it would be hard for them to escape with their lives. I took the formation flags outside one by one, and based on my observations, it should have been at least 2,000 years since anyone has touched them. To remain in this underground chamber for 2,000 years? No one has that long of a lifespan. Zhang Xian said with a grim expression. Even after reaching transcendent mortal realm, and one's physical constitution improves by leaps and bounds, one's lifespan would still be limited to a maximum of around 300 years. It was impossible to go beyond them. In fact, even upon reaching Saint Realm, where one's level of existence evolved once more, 1,000 years would still be the limit. It was completely unheard of for any saints to live for more than 2,000 years. Even Emperor Kong Shi also couldn't withstand the test of time, and eventually vanished in the annals of history. Given that the formation flags hadn't been touched for 2,000 years, it would mean that no one had come out and entered the underground chamber in this period of time. To still be living after such a long period of time, how could that be possible? Even soul oracles had a limit to their lifespan as well. Back then, if not for the protection from the 9 Hearts Lotus, under the corrosion of the 5 soul declines, it would have been impossible for Mo Hunsheng to live so long. But, if there are no living beings here, why is there no dust in here? Luo Qiqi also understood the logic behind this. However, it was extremely clear that this table had been cleaned on a frequent basis. One must know that they were in an underground chamber which was filled with rocks and dust. It was perfectly normal for dust to accumulate on furniture. If no one was living here, how could the cleanliness of the furniture be explained? Zhang Xian interrupted her thoughts. I'm not too sure either. Let's not think about it now. The urgent matter at hand is to find if there any mechanism that can get us out of here. Otherwise, it will just be a matter of time before we run out of food and water. The urgent matter at hand wasn't whether there was anyone here or not. Even if there was, given the size of this underground passageway, there was nowhere they could hide anyway. The thing they had to do now was to find an escape route. The longer they remained here, the more likely it was that something bad would happen to them. He didn't want to die here just for a mere mission. Luo Qiqi nodded as she started placing her hands on the walls to feel them. Zhang Xian also placed his fingers against the wall while shouting, "Flaws," in his mind. Who? A book immediately appeared in the Library of Heaven's Path. Zhang Xian swiftly opened it up. Viricental stone, a strong mineral found in the ground, created by the collision of earth veins. Taking a look, Zhang Xian was rendered speechless. The Library of Heaven's path only analyzed whatever it came into contact with. As what Zhang Xian touched was the wall and not a mechanism, the Library of Heaven's path only reflected the properties of the rock. He slowly slid his fingers along the wall. He was certain that there was some mechanism along the wall, but due to the other party's ingenious camouflaging of the mechanism with the surrounding viricental stone, he was unable to see it at the moment. Kacha! While Zhang Xian was moving along the wall, he suddenly heard the crisp click of a gear. Following which, Luo Qiqi excitedly called out. I found the mechanism. Turning around, he saw the portion of the wall where Luo Qiqi's hand was pressing against sinking several inches in, as though she was pressing on some kind of button. Jai. The mechanism released deep creaking sound, and an average-sized stone door slowly appeared in front of Luo Qiqi. Teacher, look! Exclaiming in excitement, she fetched a night illumination pearl with her other hand to throw it in so as to see what was inside when, an arm suddenly stretched out and grabbed her up by her neck. That arm was incomparably thick, similar to the thigh of a human. The muscles, tendons, and junctions looked swollen. The skin was a dark shade of gray, unseemly of the tone a human should have. Damn it! Everything happened so quickly that Zhang Xian didn't even have time to react. He narrowed his eyes and hurriedly rushed forward by executing his Heaven's Path movement art. In his path of motion, he whipped out his Glacier Rain sword and slashed down on that arm. Before the sharp gleam of the sword, the palm released Luo Qiqi and flicked its finger toward the sword instead. Ding! As the black fingernails came into contact with the tip of the sword, a mighty force suddenly came gushing toward Zhang Xian as though he was struck by a meteorite. With a stifled feeling in his chest, he was sent flying in an instant. Pang! His back crashed heavily against the wall, forming a human-shaped depression in it. A sweet sensation welled up in his throat, and fresh blood seeped from the edge of his mouth. With his recent breakthrough, his fighting prowess had improved tremendously. In terms of strength, he could even rival a transcendent mortal 7-Dan perfect harmonization realm intermediate stage cultivator. Yet, he couldn't even withstand a single finger flick from the other party. The opponent must be at least transcendent mortal 8-Dan, or even higher. Zhang Xian's face turned livid, and his grip on his sword tightened to the point that the edges of his fingers were turning white. Back then, he instantaneously realized the danger of the situation and executed the Heaven's Path sword art with all the might he could harness. Yet, he was still sent flying with a single flick. The huge disparity between him and his opponent left despair creeping up on him. While Zhang Xian was sent flying, the massive palm came grabbing at Luo Qiqi once more. Damn it! At that moment, Luo Qiqi also recovered from the shock from the sudden attack. No matter what, she was one of the top geniuses of the Master Teacher Academy, a transcendent mortal 6-Dan pinnacle expert. It was only due to her carelessness that the other party managed to grab her neck so easily. Having recovered her senses, she immediately bellowed loudly and stabbed her sword forward. Her swordsmanship was forceful and elegant. Just from her movements itself, it could be seen that her understanding and mastery of swordsmanship wasn't beneath Zhang Xian by too much. She had reached the sword heart realm as well. Hula! Seeing Luo Qiqi retaliate, the giant palm swiftly changed the trajectory of its motion and slapped her sword instead. Ding! Luo Qiqi's sword immediately flew out of her hands and stabbed deep into the ceiling of the room. The immense force from the motion left the sword impaled into the ceiling, shaking non-stop. Run! Knowing that it would be impossible for them to stand against that huge hand with their cultivation, Zhang Xian immediately executed the Heaven's Path movement art and appeared before Luo Qiqi. Covering her with his jinqi, he picked her up and immediately retreated to the corner. Chapter 662, Miscalculated. Teacher, what's that? Until now, Luo Qiqi's face was still pale in shock. She had used her full might for that attack, and yet her sword was sent flying so casually without even harming the other party in the slightest. A sense of helplessness was rising within her. I don't know either, but that thing isn't something that we can deal with given our current capability. Zhang Xian said as he drove the heaven's path Xinqi within him to recuperate from his previous injuries. Most probably, you might have triggered the wrong mechanism and released it. I released it. Luo Qiqi's figure jolted in shock, and regret surfaced on her face. Indeed. It was only after she pressed a certain mechanism did that massive hand appear. Even though I can't tell exactly what the other party is, the appearance of the arm did remind me of something. Zhang Xian frowned. What is it? Luo Qiqi asked grimly. Otherworldly demons. Upon exhaling a mouthful of turbid air, Zhang Xian had completely healed from his previous injuries. You mean the tribe which Kong Shi expelled from the Master Teacher continent long ago, the otherworldly demonic tribe? Luo Qiqi's entire body stiffened, and her eyes widened in disbelief. Indeed. I've seen an otherworldly demon before, and while the skin tone seemed a little different, there doesn't seem to be much difference in terms of the skeletal structure. Zhang Xian said. There was a specific reason why he chose this passageway instead of the other one where Yu Feier and the others went to. Yearning Abode Lodge, the killing intent infused within those 3 words wasn't something that a human could possess, but an otherworldly demon. Back during the Master Teacher tournament, in order to test their courage, Hong Shi had brought out an otherworldly demon. There was no way Zhang Xian could forget the feeling from the killing intent back then. And it was identical to the killing intent he felt from the 3 words. As such, he didn't think that it belonged to Grandmaster Wu Yangzi. But even so, Zhang Xian wasn't too sure at the start. After all, it had been a long time since the otherworldly demons had disappeared, but to think that there would really be some here. Furthermore, it appeared in the underground chamber he had specifically chosen to avoid them. Could he have really made the wrong choice? Could it be that the Yearning Abode Lodge was truly the living quarters of Wu Yangzi, whereas residing in this Burying Sorrow Lodge was a huge monster? Jai. While the duo was speaking, a creaking sound continued to echo from the mechanism, and the stone door kept opening. The initial crack was only sufficient for a hand to pass through, but at this rate, it would only be a matter of time before the entire stone door opened and the monster trapped within charged out. Hearing of the otherworldly demon and recalling the killing intent from a moment ago, cold sweat trickled down Luo Qiqi's head, and her face paled. Teacher, let's go up. Even though she was a 5-star master teacher, she was still young, and she had never come into contact with the otherworldly demons before. In a sense, she wasn't faring any better than Ruohuan Gongzi and the others back then. Having dealt with an otherworldly demon once, Zhang Xian didn't panic. Instead, he activated the Eye of Insight and began to analyze the situation rationally. There's a dragon severing lock up top, not to mention, the stairway is also narrow. We would be cornered over there, and that would spell our death. Escaping this narrow stone room was indeed his first thought as well, but it was far from the most correct move. There was only one road in this passageway, and the duo could barely stand side by side with its width. If they were to escape up there, it would just be a matter of time before they were cornered. What should we do then? Hearing the other party's words, Luo Qiqi also realized that the idea wasn't feasible, and her face paled in anxiety and fear. There's no other option before us now. We have to find another mechanism to escape this room. Otherwise, we'll die here. Zhang Xian said. Under the effects of the heaven's path Xinqi and his soul depth of 16.0, the astounding killing intent from the otherworldly demon had little effect on him. As such, he was still capable of rationally analyzing the situation. I understand. Luo Qiqi clenched her jaws in determination. Naturally, her reputation as the top genius of grade 2 students didn't come from nowhere. Panicked as she may be, she knew that there was no mistake in her teacher's words, so she nodded and hurriedly moved to the wall. Zhang Xian also moved to the wall and yelled, "Flaws," in his mind as he touched every single part of it. The stone room wasn't too large, spanning only several dozen square meters. It didn't take long for the duo to go around the entire room. Zhang Xian swiftly flipped through the books in the Library of Heaven's Path, but a huge frown appeared on his forehead. All of these books were on the type of mineral the walls were made of. There wasn't the slightest part detailing about a mechanism or that sort. Could he have been mistaken? Was there really no other mechanism in the room? How is it? He turned to look at Luo Qiqi. Even though she may not specialize in mechanisms like Wu Zhen, as a 5-star master teacher, she still possessed an astounding eye of discernment. Otherwise, she wouldn't have triggered the previous mechanism and accidentally let that huge fellow out. Nothing at all. Luo Qiqi shook her head. Suddenly, a thought struck her, and she immediately paled. With a nervous look, she turned to look at Zhang Xian and asked, "Teacher, is it possible that the mechanism to the exit is actually..." Unable to continue speaking, she lifted her shaking finger and pointed. Seeing where she was pointing at, Zhang Xian's eyebrows twitched. It was the stone door that the otherworldly demon was in. In truth, when he found no other mechanism in the room, he also stumbled upon this thought. However, unwilling to accept it, he shoved the thought to the side of the mind. However, as Luo Qiqi pointed it out at this moment, he had no choice but to face it now. This will be a gamble. If the exit is down there, we might still stand a chance at survival, otherwise, the only path remaining for us is death. Looking at the stone door slowly creaking open, Zhang Xian knew that it was just a matter of time before that fellow leaped out to slaughter them. They had to make up their minds now should their suspicions prove to be false, and it was actually a dead end beyond the stone door, they would be doomed. However, if there was a passageway in there, they would get a shot at getting through this ordeal. Yes. Understanding this, Luo Qiqi nodded in consent to the operation. You should hide behind the stone door first. Once that fellow leaps out, I'll draw him away from the front. Meanwhile, you should enter the stone door, and if there's a passageway, run away immediately. There's no need for you to wait for me, instructed Zhang Xian telepathically with a grim frown on his forehead. I can't. Hearing the other party's arrangement, Luo Qiqi's face flushed in agitation, and she yelled out. She had experienced the strength of that fellow inside, so she knew that Zhang Shi was putting himself at terrible risk just to create a chance to escape for her. In times of danger, most would be thinking of how they could preserve their own life. On the other hand, Zhang Shi was actually volunteering to sacrifice himself for her. There was no way she could repay this favor. Teacher. Her eyes reddened in agitation. Only in times of trouble would one's true colors shine through. This is what a real teacher is. To be able to sacrifice everything for the welfare of their student. Even though she was a 5-star master teacher, she realized that she would be unable to do the same if she were to be placed in the same position. Quick, stop hesitating. Otherwise, neither one of us will get away. Zhang Xian bellowed to her. All right. Gritting her teeth, Luo Qiqi nodded before rushing to the side of the stone door. Jia! Jia! Just as she succeeded in concealing her figure, the stone door finally opened entirely, and a towering figure emerged from beyond it. It was a 3-meter-tall fellow. Its entire body was dyed a shade of gray, and it carried an aura of death. This is a puppet made from the corpse of otherworldly demons? Narrowing her eyes, Luo Qiqi covered her mouth in shock, her slender body trembling uncontrollably. Otherworldly demons were in existence blessed with superior strength at birth. Be it their physical body, soul, or cultivation, their innate abilities were far higher than an average human. In a sense, a puppet forged out of a corpse would be similar to the soulless metal humanoid, but due to the superior physical body, it would be far stronger. In fact, Due to the nature of its body, it would be able to exert the full might the otherworldly demon possessed before its demise. This explained the mystery of the cleaned furniture from before. They were wondering how there could be any survivors after a lapse of 2,000 years, but to think that it would be a puppet instead. This kind of artifact was driven by spiritual energy, and as long as it wasn't damaged, it could be said that there was no definite limit to its lifespan. Even though they were underground, the region was rich in spiritual energy, sufficient to fuel the puppet no matter how high its consumption of spiritual energy was. Most likely, the furniture was cleaned by him. Even though it possessed no sentience, it would still accomplish the mission its master commanded of it. Just as Luo Qiqi was immersed in shock, Zhang Shi abruptly bellowed and slashed his sword. Die! Tzz la. The immense might of Zhang Xian's slash, along with the emanation of sword qi, creating a sharp buzzing noise in the air as the sword qi flew toward the puppet. The puppet stepped forward from the stone door and slapped down Zhang Xian's sword qi with its thick hands. Who? The collision between Zhang Xian's rampaging might and the puppet's slap was reminiscent of a lone boat before a tsunami. It dissipated entirely under the immense force of the slap without stopping the puppet for too long. Just as Luo Qiqi was hesitating, unable to decide whether to assist Zhang Shi or flee, the other party's anxious shout suddenly echoed in the room. Hurry up and leave. Knowing that the other party was doing this so as to offer her a chance at survival, Luo Qiqi clenched her jaws and rushed toward the stone door. Teacher, thank you. If we can get out of here alive, I'll obey every single instruction you have of me. I'll be your student and your guardian for life. Hong Long. While she was dashing through the stone door, Zhang Xian suddenly felt an immense force crushing down on him. With a sharp exhalation of breath, he was sent crashing into the wall once again. This shouldn't be. Struggling off the wall, Zhang Xian looked at the rampaging otherworldly demon puppet in bewilderment. It wasn't out of his kindness that he drew this huge fellow to himself and allowed Luo Qiqi to escape first. Rather, he wanted to make use of the other party's gratitude to form a golden page. With that, he was confident of destroying even a saint. Since the other party had acknowledged him as her teacher, and she did possess deep gratitude toward him, he thought that a golden page would surely be formed. Who could have thought that there would be nothing at all? Could it be that he failed to induce the other party's gratitude? But that shouldn't be. From her eyes, he could tell that she was earnestly grateful to him for his sacrifice. However, if that was the case, why didn't the golden page form? Suddenly, an idea popped into Zhang Xian's head. Could it be that there's a difference between the gratitude I receive from guiding someone and from saving someone? All along, the golden pages formed in the Book of Heaven's path were due to him imparting a battle technique, cultivation technique, or clarifying the doubts of another. But this situation was clearly much different from the others. This time, the gratitude the other party had for him was for saving her life. While it was indeed a huge favor, it wasn't the kind of gratitude between a teacher and a student. Rather, it was directed toward his magnanimity and his noble character. I miscalculated. Zhang Xian's lips twitched, and cold sweat started dripping down his forehead. He thought that the criteria for forming a golden page would be the relationship between of a teacher and a student, and gratitude between them. As long as a golden page was formed, he would be able to get out of this desperate situation. Who knew that he would actually fail? This time, he would really have to fight against this huge fellow head-on. And clearly, he was no match for the other party at all. Who? Just as he was stifled by the darn situation before him, the otherworldly demon was already right before him. Its massive fist smashed right toward his head. From this moment on, every action Zhang Xian took could spell his death. This was the greatest crisis Zhang Xian was in ever since his transcension. Chapter 663, Crimson Blaze Cauldron, Clone. Knowing that he would be a goner if this fist were to land on him, Zhang Xian immediately brought out his clone while his main body dodged to the side. Main body, did you find some good stuff again? Ah. The clone had been in the storage ring all along, so he wasn't aware of what was going on outside. When he was summoned, he thought that there would be something for him, similar to how it was with the cleansing lake back then, but just as he was getting excited, a massive fist was already right before his eyes. Pang! Before he could even process what was going on, he was already punched in his head, and his head flattened as though a squashed pancake. His rage immediately flew off the charts. To dare to strike me, you're courting death. Not expecting to meet with something like this as soon as he appeared, the clone was frenzied. In a moment, the clone's flattened head immediately puffed up back to normal, and he raised his fist to punch the otherworldly demon puppet. As the clone's body was molded out of 9 hearts lotus, it had no specific form, thus allowing it to recover even if it were to be reduced to a pile of mud. In a sense, it could be said to be indestructible. This was also the reason why Zhang Xian used the latter as a shield at this crucial moment. Hoo! Clashing fists with the otherworldly demon puppet, Peng. The clone was immediately sent crashing into a wall. Despite its unparalleled physical resilience, the clone's cultivation and true strength were still way too low. As such, it wasn't a match for this monster either. It was just like how a diamond might be tougher than steel, but a steel hammer could still shatter it into bits. Hung long. But while the clone couldn't stand on equal footing with the otherworldly demon puppet, it did manage to provoke it with its fist. The furious otherworldly demon puppet immediately rushed forward and kicked at the clone. This is bad. Just the fist itself nearly caused his entire body to fall apart. The clone instinctively knew that he wouldn't be able to withstand the might of this kick. Frightened, he swiftly dodged to the side. Die! At the same moment, Zhang Xian, who was wielding a sword, immediately raised his sword and cut down on the otherworldly demon puppet's neck. The main body and the clone shared their consciousness, allowing them to work together with exceptional synergy. While the clone drew attention away from the otherworldly demon puppet, Zhang Xian made use of this opportunity when the other party's attention wasn't on him to launch an attack. Ding! However, as the sword struck the neck of the puppet, a crisp metallic sound echoed with a burst of sparks. Zhang Xian felt a dull pain in his arm. It was as if he had struck a metal pole with a wooden stick. His sword nearly fell out of his hands. Isn't he simply way too tough? Taking a look, Zhang Xian realized that he had only managed to leave nothing but a white scar on the other party's neck. His face immediately darkened. The sword he was wielding was a spirit intermediate tier pinnacle sword, and yet, an attack with his full might actually failed to even cut through the other party's skin. How formidable must this fellow's defense be? Could it be that, on top of the corpse of an otherworldly demon, some other materials were used to forge this puppet into a weapon? Zhang Xian's eyes narrowed. With an immense strength exceeding 9 million ding and the might of a spirit intermediate tier weapon, even the head of a transcendent mortal 8 Dan expert would be easily lopped off. And yet, he barely scraped the other party's skin. That could only mean one thing. This fellow wasn't just an ordinary puppet forged out of a mere corpse. It was highly likely that its body was coated with a layer of some extraordinary alloy, turning it into a weapon exceeding spirit intermediate tier. That was the only plausible explanation as to why Zhang Xian's attack was rendered ineffective. How do I fight against something like this? Zhang Xian's face turned exceptionally awful. Even his strongest weapon wasn't sufficient to break through the other party's defense. In other words, he was incapable of hurting the other party, needless to say, kill it. Who? While Zhang Xian was in the midst of despairing, the otherworldly demon puppet, infuriated by his backstab, turned around and smashed its massive fist at him. Its fist seemed to wield strength comparable to a mountain, compressing the air in space with a loud sonic boom. Even before it could reach Zhang Xian, he could already feel a searing heat in his surroundings, as though he had been placed in a massive cauldron. Might of a searing cauldron. Legend has it that when one's fist reached a certain strength, the shock wave of one's punch would become reminiscent of a searing cauldron, capable of even melting steel. Zhang Xian had always thought that it was just an exaggeration of old legends, but to think that he would experience it himself. Retreat. Knowing that it was impossible to stand against such a powerful punch, Zhang Xian immediately rushed backward. Pang! However, the room was simply too small. Barely after retreating 2 steps, he felt the cold wall pressing tightly against his back. Dragon Scale Amulet. Knowing that it would be impossible for him to dodge this attack, Zhang Xian was left with no choice but to activate the amulet from before. There were only 3 uses to this object. He had used it once in the Soul Oracle tomb, and this was his second use. A light barrier appeared and shrouded him. Boom! As the fist came into contact with the light barrier, an ear-splitting sonic boom sounded, and the latter immediately burst. In an instant, Zhang Xian felt an immense force transferring from the barrier and onto him. The stone wall directly behind him was reduced to dust while he spurted a mouthful of fresh blood. If not for the physical body tempering he had undergone in the cleansing lake, his bones would have been shattered by that blow. To be able to destroy a barrier that could even withstand an attack from a transcendent mortal 9-dan pinnacle, this fellow's strength must have reached Saint Realm. Exhaling deeply, Zhang Xian swiftly moved aside to create room for himself while driving the Heaven's Path Shinqi within him to heal his injuries. He thought that as long as he collaborated with his clone, even if they couldn't defeat it, he would at least be able to escape. Who could have known that, on top of being strong, the other party's defensive capabilities would be extraordinary as well. Only a saint could possibly possess such capabilities. At Zhang Xian's current cultivation, it was impossible for him to defeat the other party. Unless there's a spirit pinnacle weapon for me to wield. Zhang Xian clenched his fists tightly in agitation. Due to the other party's overwhelming defense, even though he knew its flaws, with his current strength, it was impossible for him to exploit them against the other party. However, it was possible for him to make up for his weakness through a stronger weapon. If there was a spirit pinnacle weapon here, he might still stand a chance against the puppet, otherwise, the only fate that awaited him would be death. What should he do? Ever since his transcension, everything had been smooth sailing. He never thought that a day would come where he would meet with such a dangerous situation. If the other party was a living being, he might still be able to hoodwink it through his impartation of heaven's will, just as he had done with the otherworldly demon back then. But a puppet possessed no sentience at all. No number of words could possibly sway a being whose only purpose of existence was to accomplish the instructions asked of it. While Zhang Xian was at a loss, he suddenly heard Luo Qiqi's telepathic voice in his head. "Teacher, there's a passageway in here, come in." Many things had happened, but it had only been 10 breaths since she entered the stone door. It seemed as though she found something within it. "All right." Zhang Xian flicked his wrist and exerted another wave of sword qi. At the same moment, he had his clone attack from behind. After all was done, he immediately turned around and fled for the stone door. His clone was indestructible, so he had nothing to fear, but Zhang Xian was different. Should his head be caved in by that fearsome fist, he would really die on the spot. Jai. Seemingly sensing Zhang Xian's intention, the otherworldly demon puppet flew into a greater rage. Paying no heed to his sword qi, it charged forward right at Zhang Xian. It wanted to use the fearsome might of its charge to smash Zhang Xian's body. Damn it! Zhang Xian gritted with his teeth in frustration. If it was just a single punch, he could still avoid it with his movement art. However, if it was an entire body, this narrow room had no space for him to dodge at all. Once that massive body crashed into him, even if he were to survive, he would be as good as dead. Scram! At that moment, his clone suddenly charged forward and struck the otherworldly demon puppet's side. Pang! Even though his clone wasn't sufficiently strong to knock down the puppet, he still managed to cause a slight deviation in the direction of its charge. What should have struck Zhang Xian's body squarely ended up sweeping by his shoulder. Wang! At that crucial moment, Zhang Xian activated the last dragon scale amulet, and with a loud "Kacha!" the light barrier broke. Under the immense force of that charge, Zhang Xian fell through the stone door. Clone, come back! While Zhang Xian was flying through the air, he returned the clone into his storage ring before crashing into the wall once more. A worried voice called out from in front of him. Teacher! Turning around, he saw a passageway behind the stone door. It seemed like there was some kind of mechanism in here which Luo Qiqi had triggered in the time she was in here. The passageway was narrow, allowing only one person to pass through at a time. The place where he had crashed into was the wall of this exact passageway. Knowing that the huge fellow could come rushing in at any moment, Zhang Xian immediately stood up and dashed inward, not daring to hesitate in the slightest. The passageway wasn't too long, only around 10 meters or so. Zhang Xian came to the end within half a breath, and a vast stone chamber appeared before him. It was much larger than the room from before, spanning over several thousand square meters. Not expecting that there would be such a huge space behind that narrow passageway, Zhang Xian was taken aback. While Zhang Xian was examining the area curiously, Luo Qiqi said excitedly, Teacher, you're right. These are indeed Grandmaster Wu Yangzi's living quarters. Here are the books and cauldron that he left behind. Lifting his gaze, he saw the young lady looking at her excitedly. She was, of course, delighted to see that her teacher was fine, but it was something else that was causing her excitement. Books? Cauldron? Lifting his gaze, under the illumination of numerous night illumination pearls, there was a row of giant bookshelves behind the young lady. Not too far away from the bookshelves stood a massive cauldron. Unlike the cauldrons used for pill forging, this one looked like a huge furnace instead. Even though it wasn't lit, one could still feel a violent energy rampaging within it. With just a glance, it was clear that it was an extraordinary artifact. I've examined it, and it's the forging cauldron that Grandmaster Wu Yangzi used back then, the Crimson Blaze Cauldron. Luo Qiqi said. A blacksmith's cauldron was equivalent to his pride and his life. The fact that his cauldron was here meant that he had definitely lived here before. In other words, they were at the right place. The Burying Sorrow Lodge was indeed where Grandmaster Wu Yangzi had lived after he had been kidnapped. As long as they brought this Crimson Blaze Cauldron back to the academy, it would mean that they had succeeded in clearing their mission. Great! Have you found the exit yet? Zhang Xian asked. In truth, he wasn't too interested in the mission. His current priority was to find an exit to leave this damned place. The narrow passageway could hold back the massive fellow for a moment, but it would only be a matter of time before it charged in there and kills them. Before they could enjoy whatever treasures were in there, they had to ensure their survival first. Exit? I haven't found it yet. Luo Qiqi's face paled. In truth, the sight of the Crimson Blaze Cauldron and the books had left her so excited that she had forgotten her current goal. Furthermore, given the size of the room and poor lighting, it would be hard for them to find it in an instant either. Boom! Before she could finish her words, the duo suddenly felt a powerful killing intent assaulting them. The puppet from before walked into the hall. This is really bad. Zhang Xian's face paled. Chapter 664, Zhang Xian sets up a formation. Before they could find the exit, the other party had already rushed into the chamber. They were now cornered like rats. Not giving Zhang Xian any time to think, the otherworldly demon puppet rushed straight toward Zhang Xian as soon as it entered the room. Clearly, it was currently blinded by rage such that it couldn't care less about Luo Qiqi. Damn it! Knowing that it was impossible for him to withstand the fearsome might of this fellow, Zhang Xian immediately flew into the sky. It was fortunate that the ceiling of the chamber was also much higher than the stone room, being over several dozen meters high. Even though Zhang Xian was unable to fight against the otherworldly demon puppet, he could escape to the sky temporarily to think of a plan. So, as soon as he flew up, he immediately felt a powerful force rushing up to him. The puppet had leaped up in pursuit of him. Limited by the nature of its existence as a puppet, this fellow wasn't capable of flight. But even so, a height of several dozen meters wasn't difficult for a puppet possessing might equivalent to a saint to cover. "Teacher, I'll help you." Seeing how that fellow was pursuing her teacher relentlessly, Luo Qiqi was anxious. She immediately whipped out a bow, drew an arrow, and shot it right toward the puppet in the sky. Woo! Harnessing the full might of a transcendent mortal 6-dan pinnacle expert, it appeared right before the puppet in an instant. However, with a single flick of its arm, it patted away the arrow easily. However, this brief lapse in its concentration granted Zhang Xian an opportunity to alter the direction of his flight to Luo Qiqi. On the other hand, as the puppet was flying through the force of its leap, it could only continue on with the trajectory of its motion. "Teacher." At that crucial moment, there was no time for Luo Qiqi to question why Zhang Xian was flying. She worriedly looked over and asked, "Are you fine?" "I'm fine now, but if we don't find the exit anytime soon, we will be goners soon," Zhang Xian said grimly. Although he was able to maneuver around the ceiling to dodge the other party's attacks, once his Jinqi ran dry, they would still be done for. Knowing that there was no time to talk any further, Zhang Xian quickly instructed, "Take the crimson blaze cauldron and quickly look for the exit." "Yes." Luo Qiqi hurriedly nodded before rushing over to the cauldron. She placed her palm on it, intending to place it within her storage ring. But before she could move it, the gears of a mechanism suddenly clicked, and a voice sounded. "I am Wu Yangzi. Guests, if you can forge a spirit high-tier weapon, you'll be entitled to my heritage. Otherwise, if you were to forcefully claim my crimson blaze cauldron, the entire underground chamber will collapse. Only through earning my heritage will I reveal the exit to this chamber. Otherwise, be prepared to be buried with me." Collapse? Buried with him? Zhang Xian and Luo Qiqi were stunned for a moment before frenzy overwhelmed them. Who in the world wants your heritage? With such a damned puppet chasing after their lives, who has the time to forge your freaking weapons? You must be trying to kill us. Besides, forging a spirit high-tier weapon. Only 5-star pinnacle blacksmiths can do so. Even though Luo Qiqi had dabbled in weapon forging before, she was only a 5-star primary blacksmith. How could she forge a weapon which only a 5-star pinnacle could forge? On the other hand, Zhang Xian could be said to know nothing about weapon forging at all. He wasn't even qualified as a 1-star blacksmith, so that was even more impossible for him. Boom! While the duo was still depressed about their current predicament, a shock wave suddenly burst in the chamber. The otherworldly demon puppet had already landed on the ground, and after determining its next path of motion, it dashed forward. Given the latter's speed, it would be just a few breaths before it reaches them. "Teacher, what do we do?" Luo Qiqi asked, panicking. At the same time, Zhang Xian also felt goosebumps rising up on his skin. He had just crossed hands with this huge fellow, and despite working together with his clone, they could hardly even fend off a single move. To face it in a direct battle, they would probably be destroyed in just a few blows. And according to Wu Yangzi's words, only those who had obtained his heritage could leave. To obtain his heritage, they would have to forge a weapon, but under such circumstances, even if they wanted to give it a try, this huge fellow couldn't possibly give them any. Unless there was some kind of formation that could trap this huge fellow temporarily. Otherwise, we won't be able to forge anything at all. Luo Qiqi said anxiously. Indeed. Furthermore, the formation must be at least grade 6, or else he would break out in an instant. Zhang Xian nodded in agreement. He was just about to continue speaking when an epiphany suddenly struck him. Grade 6 formation. Little Chi, help me by distracting this fellow for a few breaths. Suddenly recalling something, Zhang Xian leaped up and flew into the sky. All right. Judging from her teacher's expression, he must have noticed something. Luo Qiqi immediately took out another handful of arrows and shot at the puppet. So. Every single arrow of hers harnessed immense might, leaving the puppet no choice but to deflect them properly. Knowing that it was impossible for Luo Qiqi to sustain this, Zhang Xian hurriedly flicked his wrist, and a bunch of formation flags appeared in his hands. These were the ones which he had procured at the mountain valley outside earlier on. Zhang Xian knew a lot of the grade 3 formations, but his knowledge for anything beyond grade 4 was terribly limited. The only grade 5 formation he knew was a spirit-gathering formation. As such, it should be impossible for him to set up a grade 6 formation. Without the formation blueprint and formation flags, how could he possibly succeed? But due to sheer coincidence, he did have the formation blueprint and formation flags for a grade 6 formation. Yu Feier had used a formation-destroying silver needle to trigger the formation, thus creating a detailed book on its flaws to be compiled in the Library of Heaven's Path. This had given Zhang Xian perfect knowledge regarding the formation. And this hidden formation happened to be grade 6, and he also had those flags in his storage ring as well. Back then, he was only thinking that it would be a huge waste to leave behind such valuable objects. Who would have thought that it might actually save his life now? Zhang Xian examined the hall from his position in the sky. The chamber is sufficiently huge for me to lay out the formation. He intended to use this formation to hide the region where the cauldron and books were gathered. As long as he could keep the puppet out for a period of time, they would be able to try to obtain Wu Yangzi's heritage through forging a weapon. However, this hidden formation required substantial space to lay it out, and it was fortunate that this chamber was large enough. Otherwise, there would be nothing Zhang Xian could do. All right. Confirming the positions, Zhang Xian flicked his fingers. Wang. A couple of the formation flags in his palm scattered across the entire room. Formation flags? Is teacher going to set up a formation? Luo Qiqi, who was busy stopping the puppet with her arrows, couldn't help but be slightly bewildered by Zhang Xian's actions. Even though she hadn't studied formations before, her close friend was a 5-star formation master, so she had many opportunities to see how formations were laid out. Even the most formidable formation master in the Master Teacher Academy had to use a compass to assess the surroundings first, searching inch by inch and placing flag after flag into the ground. Yet, this fellow actually simply threw a bunch of formation flags down from the sky at once. Was this for real? Would a formation setup so casually really work? Wasn't this taking formations too lightly? While she was overwhelmed by astonishment, one of the arrows was accidentally shot with insufficient strength. As such, with a furious roar, the puppet on the receiving end stretched out its hand and grabbed it, before throwing it back at her. Woo! Even though the arrow was hurled with the puppet's bare hands, its strength was simply too great. It whizzed through the air, heading straight back at Luo Qiqi. Alarmed, Luo Qiqi's eyes narrowed, and she quickly stepped aside. But even so, the sheer wind pressure from the trajectory of the arrow ripped the cloth by her shoulder and deeply cut her snow-white skin. Roar! At the same time, the otherworldly demon puppet, freed from the previous barrage of arrows, roared furiously and leaped at Zhang Xian. Zhang Xian swiftly twisted his body and changed his trajectory. At the same time, he continued to hurl flags downward to specific locations below. Your enemy is me, don't even think of going after teacher. Seeing that the fellow was pursuing Zhang Xian once more, Luo Qiqi clenched her jaws and drew her arrows once more. Wang! This arrow, pulled out of rage, harnessed nearly her entire might. With a speed as swift as a shooting star, it appeared before the otherworldly demon puppet in an instant. Ding! Before the puppet could even react, it was already shot in its glabella. However, this fellow's defense was simply too strong. Not to mention, as a puppet, concepts such as acupoint and the like didn't apply to it. As such, striking what that should have been a vital didn't damage it in the least, on the contrary, it only infuriated it further. Roaring furiously, it changed its target from Zhang Xian to her. With that previous attack, its aggression had been pulled from Zhang Xian to her. Its massive arms threatened to smash the woman before it into a lump of meat. Who? Astonished, Luo Qiqi could hardly react, and the otherworldly demon puppet was already standing right before her. With open fingers, its hand stretched forward to grab her. Even though its attack wasn't reinforced with Jinqi, the sheer brute force behind it still made the young lady's breathing hasten. Get lost. There was no time for her to shoot an arrow anymore. Thus, with an enraged roar, she smashed her bow at the huge fellow before her. Even though it was unlikely to help her much, she had no other choice before her. Her sword was still deeply lodged in the ceiling of the stone room. Besides, even if she wanted to draw another weapon at this moment, she wouldn't make it in time. Voila! Before the bow could strike the puppet, the latter had already grabbed it firmly and twisted it forcefully. Feeling an immense force threatening to rip her hands, Luo Qiqi swiftly released her grip. Even Zhang Xian couldn't stand toe-to-toe against this monstrous puppet, so how could she possibly do so? Kacha! With the bow in its hands, the otherworldly demon puppet ripped the spirit intermediate tier weapon into two before casually tossing it aside. Then, it reached out with its hand to grab Luo Qiqi once more. Pai li pa la. An incredible sonic boom exploded in the air. Luo Qiqi hurriedly backed away, but she was still too late. She managed to avoid the grip, but she was struck in her chest by a fearsome shock wave, causing her to flip several rounds in midair before crashing forcefully into a wall not too away. PSST. A mouthful of fresh blood spewed out, and Luo Qiqi's face turned incredibly pale. To think that a grade 2 genius of the Master Teacher Academy would be incapable of even withstanding a single attack from the other party. This left her feeling incredibly frustrated and helpless. No, I must stall for some time for my teacher. Seeing as the puppet turned its eyes back to Zhang Xian once more, Luo Qiqi clenched her jaws, climbed to her feet, and dashed forward. With a furious roar, she threw her fist forward. Your opponent is me. Luo Feng Fist. This was a spirit high-tier fist art that her ancestors left behind. It was the most powerful technique she had at hand. With this battle technique, she could even stand toe-to-toe with a transcendent mortal 7-Dan perfect harmonization realm primary stage expert. A pity it was, but this monster was neither a human nor a perfect harmonization realm expert. The otherworldly demon puppet lifted its finger and tapped lightly on Luo Qiqi's fist. Pooh! Spewing blood frenziedly, Luo Qiqi was sent flying back into the wall once more. Severely injured, if she were to crash into the wall one more time, she might just end up crippled. However, at that moment, a surge of Jinqi embraced her, cushioning the impact. Following which, she heard a nonchalant voice by her ears. Leave the rest to me. Chapter 665, Heaven's Path Smith Art. Hearing those words, Luo Qiqi's eyes immediately reddened. Unknowingly, Zhang Xian was already standing before her. Looking around, she saw more than 100 formation flags erected in the surroundings. While they were placed in a unique formation, there wasn't the slightest disturbance from them. Teacher, are you done laying out your formation? Almost. Chuckling lightly, Zhang Xian flicked his wrist, and a formation plate flew out. Wang! The formation plate was activated in midair, and spiritual energy was immediately drawn to it, forming a huge vortex. This is Spirit Gathering Formation. Luo Qiqi was taken aback. Wasn't he setting up a formation in the surrounding? Why was he activating a Spirit Gathering Formation now? Besides, a spirit-gathering formation should be used for cultivating. She had never heard of anyone using it in a battle, especially against one that possesses the strength of a saint. Roar! The puppet seemed to be taken aback by the formation played as well, but after realizing that nothing had happened at all, it immediately charged forward like a rampaging beast. As the other party swiftly closed the distance between them, Luo Qiqi grew tenser and tenser. But at that moment, the young man before her harumphed coldly. Following which, he stomped on the ground, and the area before him suddenly distorted. The puppet had disappeared, and silence returned to the chamber. It was as if the earlier sight was only a figment of her imagination. What is going on? Luo Qiqi examined her surroundings anxiously, but she realized that the crimson blaze cauldron and the books were still present. However, the area where the puppet was earlier had disappeared completely from view and from touch, replaced by deep darkness. It seemed as though the young man's stomp had torn this space away to an entirely different dimension. This is a hidden formation. A thought suddenly emerged in her mind. There was only one type of formation which could produce this type of effect, hidden formations. On top of hiding the formation itself, it would also hide a specific space. That was also the reason why they couldn't find the entrance to the underground chamber no matter how thoroughly they searched. If not for deciphering the formation, even if they were given 3 more years and dug up the entire ground in that valley, they would not find the entrance leading down here. She was curious as to what Zhang Shi was setting up earlier, but after seeing this bizarre sight, she suddenly recalled the formation flags and such a thought came to mind. However, hidden formations require an immense amount of spiritual energy to trigger. One has to be at least a 6-star formation master to activate it. How did teacher manage to do so? Even though there was no doubt about the matter, she still found it hard to believe. Grade 6 formations, not to mention such a profound hidden formation, required one to possess a cultivation of at least transcendent mortal 6 Dan to activate. Given that Zhang Shi was only at the consonant spirit realm, this was inconceivable. Could it be the spirit-gathering formation from earlier? Luo Qiqi narrowed her eyes. Just a moment ago, Zhang Shi threw out a spirit-gathering formation. She didn't think much of it earlier, but putting everything together, she immediately came to a realization. That grade 5 spirit-gathering formation must have served as the engine to activating this hidden formation. Using a formation to activate another, this was the legendary augmented formation. Even 6-star pinnacle formation masters would find it hard to install something as complex as this. Yet, not only had Zhang Shi managed to do so, he even did it with incredible ease. Luo Qiqi's eyes were about to pop out from their sockets. Formations were formed by harnessing spiritual energy to influence the magnetic field in the environment to create specific phenomena. The concept of 1 + 1 = 2 didn't apply here. The interference between two formations could easily prove to be destructive, thus rendering both formations ineffective simultaneously. To use a spirit-gathering formation to activate a hidden formation, even though she had just seen it with her own eyes, she still found it hard to believe. How formidable must one's understanding and control over formations be to achieve such a feat? Oblivious to Luo Qiqi's shock, Zhang Xian stepped forward and said, "All right. Now that we're hidden, let's hurry up and forge the weapon to obtain Grandmaster Wu Yangzi's heritage." Given his current capability, it was impossible for him to activate a grade 6 hidden formation. In fact, even if he were able to activate it, he didn't have sufficient jinqi to maintain it for too long. In a sense, it was similar to a snail pulling a carriage. Even though he did possess strong jinqi, it was insufficient to maintain the operation of a grade 6 formation. Left with no other choice, he could only resort to the grade 5 spirit-gathering formation in his storage ring. With this and a few hundred middle-tier spirit stones in his possession, he could activate and maintain the grade 6 hidden formation for a fair amount of time. As for complementing the spirit-gathering formation with the hidden formation perfectly with one another, with the Library of Heaven's path in hand, it truly wasn't a difficult problem for him at all. And as expected, he succeeded eventually. Indeed. The urgent matter at hand is to forge a spirit high-tier weapon, meet the requirements of Grandmaster Wu Yangzi's heritage, and uncover the way to leave this underground chamber. Recovering from her shock, Luo Qiqi nodded. Then, with a doubtful voice, she asked, "Is teacher going to forge the weapon personally?" Even though her teacher was younger than her, he had shown capability that astounded her far too often. At this point, she wouldn't be astonished even if the other party were to forge a spirit high-tier weapon. Me? Zhang Xian shook his head. He couldn't do so even if he wanted to. Blacksmith was one of the occupations of the upper 9 paths as well. Similar to pill forging, smithing emphasized heavily on one's basics. As such, it required many years of practice to refine one's movements. Given that Zhang Xian had never forged a weapon before, how was he supposed to forge a spirit high-tier weapon all of the sudden? After all, despite his extensive knowledge of pill forging, he still wasn't able to forge a single pill at all. This was even more so for smithing. Teacher won't be doing it. Luo Qiqi was taken aback. I won't. You should do the forging instead. Zhang Xian said. Me? Luo Qiqi was astonished. It won't be appropriate for me to acknowledge another person as my teacher. If the other party insists on taking me in as his student after I win his recognition, I would be put in a tight spot. Zhang Xian replied nonchalantly. Your teacher is Yang Shi, right? He imparts the way of smithing to you as well. Luo Qiqi was taken aback. That day, at the cleansing lake, Yang Shi rose from a blazing dragon and resolved the calamity with a single shoe. This astounding feat had left her incredibly impressed. She'd thought that Yang Shi was only Zhang Shi's cultivation teacher, but to think that he would be teaching the latter smithing as well. Indeed. Zhang Xian nodded. But Luo Qiqi was filled with envy upon hearing those words. But soon, a bitter smile surfaced on her lips, and a deep frown appeared on her forehead. I'm only a 5-star primary blacksmith. I don't think that I can forge anything that could satisfy Grandmaster Wu Yangzi. Don't worry, I'll guide you along, Zhang Xian said. Thank you. Hearing that the other party would guide her along, Luo Qiqi's face flushed in agitation. One must know that Zhang Shi was the person who guided her to forging a grade 6 pill. You should quickly recuperate from your injuries first. Otherwise, you might collapse while you're smithing. Zhang Xian waved his hands. Yes. Knowing that her severe injuries would impede her from forging a satisfactory weapon, Luo Qiqi immediately sat down and swallowed a recovery pill. Gugugu. Warm medicinal energy flowed through her body, healing her wounds slowly. While the other party was in the midst of recuperating, Zhang Xian hurried over to the bookshelves. Honestly speaking, while he did possess some knowledge of smithing, it was terribly limited. While he had read some books on smithing in Tianxian Kingdom and Tianwu Kingdom, they were limited in quantity, and as such, he was unable to form a complete system of the art. In other words, his Heaven's Path smith art was incomplete. Under such circumstances, while it was possible for him to guide another to forge an ordinary weapon, a spirit high-tier weapon was far out of his league. Thus, the only course of action he could take at the moment was to quickly brush up on his knowledge. Unlike the hidden formation set up outside previously, where the formation was harmonized with nature and gathered spiritual energy from the entire mountain range spanning over several thousand kilometers, this formation was only powered by his middle-tier spirit stones. Once his hundreds of middle-tier spirit stones were sapped dry, the hidden formation would immediately fall apart. By then, the puppet would be able to get in, and they would be doomed. Fortunately, the books on the shelves were all regarding smithing. It was either Grandmaster Wu Yangzi's own collection or it was given to him by the group who kidnapped him so that he could refer to it. But nevertheless, the presence of these books was good news. Without any hesitation, Zhang Xian placed his finger on the first book and began running. In a tea's time, he finished gathering the 100,000 books on the shelves into the library of Heaven's Path. Compile. With a thought, the 100,000 books fused together to form 6 books. They were the Heaven's Path Smith Art, books from 1 star to 6 star. As long as he studied all of them, his understanding of smithing would become on par with a real 6-star blacksmith. He began flipping through it. Smithing is the art of creating tools suitable for human use. The best tool is a human's body, and the essence to Heaven's Path Smith Art is to forge a weapon through a human's body. The profound logic contained within the book left him refreshed, and countless doubts that had baffled him before immediately resolved themselves. There might be countless variations to pill forging and smithing, but standing at the center of each of them was a set of fundamental laws. And those were exactly what the Heaven's Path books recorded. Mastering the knowledge within the Heaven's Path Smith Art books meant to master the fundamental laws of smithing. With this, it wouldn't be difficult for him to smith any weapons. Closing his eyes, Zhang Xian began studying them book by book. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. Soon, 12 hours passed. Zhang Xian had finished mastering the knowledge within the 6 Heaven's Path Smith Art books. At the same time, he had also turned from an ignorant amateur into a true grandmaster blacksmith. Even if Wu Yangzi were to come to life now, it was unlikely he could compete with Zhang Xian in the field of smithing. But of course, this only applied to knowledge, not skill. Despite his extensive and profound knowledge of the art, it was likely that he would fail terribly if he were to try to smith a weapon. Smithing was a profound art that required many years of practice. Just forging the metal ingot in itself required much practice. It would be impossible to master the art within an instant. If Zhang Xian wanted to pursue this path, he would have to devote substantial time into practicing. Looks like there's no physical body cultivation technique here. After studying the Heaven's Path Smith Art, Zhang Xian went through the remaining books and shook his head in disappointment. His main purpose here was to obtain Wu Yangzi's physical body cultivation technique, but there wasn't one on the bookshelves. Shaking his head, Zhang Xian stood up and looked at Luo Qiqi. However, a frown immediately appeared on his face. "You haven't recovered from your injury yet?" Luo Qiqi was still meditating on the spot, recuperating from her injury. Even though her aura felt significantly stronger than before, she hadn't completely recovered from her internal injury yet. Judging from her ragged breathing, she was still in pain. It had been 12 hours already, and despite consuming a recovery pill, the other party hadn't fully healed from her injuries. This was a little, way too slow. Halting her meditation, Luo Qiqi lifted her head and replied, "My injuries are too severe. Even though I've consumed medicine, I'll still require around 3 days to make substantial recovery, and half a month to recover to my peak state." She had incurred serious injuries from the previous battle, and to be able to heal within 3 days was already an incredible feat after all. Recovering from one's injuries wasn't like eating, where one could speed up just because one wanted to. Hearing that she would still require such a long period of time, Zhang Xian frowned. "The longer we wait, the more danger we are in." While they were currently hidden by the formation, no one could guarantee that there wouldn't be any abrupt changes, especially not in a foreign place like this. Time was a luxury for them at the moment. After a moment of hesitation, Zhang Xian asked, "Do you have a qi regeneration pill?" "Qi regeneration pill?" "I do," Luo Qiqi replied. Qi regeneration pill was one of the most common medicaments that cultivators used to recover their zhenqi. Naturally, there were different tiers to cater to those of different cultivation realms. Similar to spirit-gathering formations, a single leap in the tier of the pill would spell a world of difference in its effectiveness. The Qi regeneration pill in her possession was at grade 5 primary. Even if her zhenqi were to be sapped dry, by consuming one, she would be able to recover around 50% of her zhenqi for a short moment to cope with any danger before her. Flicking her wrist, she took out one. Grabbing the pill, Zhang Xian circled it around his fingers before passing it back. Eat it. Yes. Even though Luo Qiqi was perplexed, she still swallowed the pill. Qi regeneration pills were only used to recover one's Xinqi. Given that her Xinqi was currently full at the moment, what was the use consuming it? Just as she was bewildered by Zhang Xian's actions, the Qi regeneration pill she swallowed slowly melted, and a warm surge of energy flowed through her entire body. Wherever the energy flowed, her injuries, be they internal or external, healed at a noticeable pace. A few breaths later, she felt completely re-energized, as though a phoenix rising from the ashes. This. Luo Qiqi stood up and moved her body around, and her eyes immediately widened in disbelief. The injuries that should have taken at least half a month of recuperation actually healed right after consuming a single Qi regeneration pill. Teacher, this Qi regeneration pill. No matter how slow she might be, it was clear that her teacher had done something to the Qi regeneration pill to turn it into such an incredible recovery medicine. Without even using a cauldron or adding in any medicinal herbs, just by touching it, he was able to change the property of a pill. How in the world did he do it? Zhang Xian waved his hands casually and instructed, "All right, prepare yourself. We will start smithing soon." If they were to depend on Luo Qiqi's means of recovery, it would have been a long while before they could have started smithing anything. The only way to have healed her injuries so swiftly via his Heaven's Path Xinqi. However, this type of Xinqi was too peculiar, and the other party was a 5-star master teacher as well. If he had infused it into the other party's body directly, there was a high chance that the other party would have noticed the peculiarity in his Xinqi. Thus, he decided to make use of an intermediary. The Qi regeneration pill, which contained rampaging spiritual energy, was the best intermediary for him to store his Xinqi in. It helped to conceal the presence of his Xinqi at the initial phase, and by the time the other party realized that something was odd, his Xinqi would have already melded with the other party's Xinqi, thus making it impossible for her to investigate the matter. In essence, it worked the same way as his Saint Recovery medicinal wine as well. Due to the spiciness of the wine, it drew one's attention away from the already nearly indiscernible Heaven's Path Xinqi. Knowing that her teacher was unwilling to speak about the topic, Luo Qiqi also knew better than to probe the other party's secrets. Thus, she stepped up to the crimson blaze cauldron. There were all kinds of materials around the cauldron, be it coal or ores, allowing her to start smithing any time she was ready. Let's begin. Taking in a deep breath, Luo Qiqi flicked her wrist and placed the coal into the cauldron before lighting it up using a unique Xinqi infusion method. Under the infusion of her Xinqi, it didn't take long for the cauldron to grow fiery hot. The temperature required for forging a weapon was much higher than that required to forge a pill. The surroundings were scorching, and it felt as though any sword would melt as soon as it was thrown in. What is the highest tier of weapons you have forged? Judging from the fluid movements Luo Qiqi made as she lit up the flame within the cauldron, Zhang Xian could tell that she had a good foundation and nodded in commendation. Teacher, the best weapon I've ever forged is a spirit low-tier weapon. I've never succeeded in forging a spirit intermediate-tier weapon before. Luo Qiqi said with a reddened face. The basic requirement to becoming a 5-star blacksmith was to be able to forge a spirit low-tier weapon. It seemed like she barely reached the mark 5-star primary blacksmith. It'll indeed be difficult for you to forge a spirit high-tier weapon. Zhang Xian frowned. Unlike pill forging, the cultivation requirement for smithing was far stricter. For the former, as long as one refined and fused the medicinal herbs in the most accurate manner, there would be a high chance of forming a pill. On the other hand, in smithing, if one's cultivation wasn't sufficiently high, one would be unable to bring out sufficient heat from the coal, thus making it difficult to even melt the ores. Under such circumstances, it would be difficult to forge a good weapon. Given that Luo Qiqi had never succeeded in forging a spirit intermediate tier weapon, chances were that there was a huge flaw in her control over the flames. Her current cultivation realm didn't help either. If she couldn't even generate sufficient heat to melt the ores properly, how could she succeed? With a dark expression, Zhang Xian began scanning through the various materials which Wu Yangzi had left behind. Crimson flower ore, gilt violet ore, cold emerald stone. Every single ore that Zhang Xian saw only made his complexion darken further. All of them were hard to process, and even the easiest cold emerald stone demanded a minimum cultivation of transcendent mortal 7 dan to melt. As for crimson flower ore and gilt violet ore, these would require one to be transcendent mortal 8 dan or even 9 dan to process. In other words, putting aside smithing, just melting these ores would be nigh impossible for them. After a long moment of thought, Zhang Xian finally said, "Given your current capability and cultivation realm, forging a spirit high-tier weapon is impossible. However, if it's just upgrading an existent weapon, it might still be possible." If they were unable to melt the ore, they would be unable to form metal ingots to smith weapons. However, if it was just raising the tier of an existing weapon, the job should prove to be significantly easier. As it was already a completed piece, they wouldn't need to melt the ores entirely to upgrade it. Since upgrading an existing weapon could be considered as forging as well, there was unlikely to be any fuss on this aspect. Upgrade? Luo Qiqi questioned a little awkwardly. Upgrading an existing weapon would indeed be easier, just that. I lost my only spirit intermediate tier sword in the previous battle, not to mention, none of my weapons are upgradable. Upgrading a weapon may be easier, but there were specific prerequisites for a weapon to be upgradable. She did have a spirit intermediate tier weapon, but it was smashed into the ceiling in the battle at the stone room earlier, and she hadn't gotten a chance to retrieve yet. More importantly, these weapons were completed products. If they were to be tempered any further, they might exceed their limits, resulting in a fall in quality instead. Only specific upgradable weapons could be further forged and refined. But these types of weapons were incredibly rare, even she had hardly seen any of those. How could they find any all of a sudden, especially given that they were trapped here? Let's use mine then. Flicking his wrist, Zhang Xian took out his Glacier Rain sword. He had obtained this sword from the mystical treasure hall back then, and it was an upgradable spirit intermediate tier pinnacle weapon. This. Alright then. Seeing how her teacher offered to use his own personal weapon despite the risk of having its quality lowered, Luo Qiqi felt a surge of warmth flowing through her heart. Noticing the other party's lack of confidence, Zhang Xian encouraged her. There's no need to be nervous. Just do as I say, and it won't be too difficult to raise the Glacier Rain sword to spirit high tier. Having learned from the 6 books of Heaven's Path smith art, his understanding of smithing had reached a level surpassing that of even Wu Yangzi. Even though he was unable to melt most ores due to the limitation of his cultivation, it wouldn't be too hard to raise the Glacier Rain sword, which was already a step away from a breakthrough, to spirit high tier. However, our current goal isn't spirit high tier but pinnacle. Zhang Xian said grimly. Pinnacle. Luo Qiqi was taken aback. Reaching high tier would meet Wu Yangzi's requirement, and they would be able to obtain the heritage already. Was there really a need to reach pinnacle? Even ordinary 6-star blacksmiths would find it hard to craft a spirit pinnacle weapon. For her to do so, even if it was just upgrading, she didn't think that it was possible at all. Indeed. Zhang Xian nodded. I don't know what kind of ores that puppet was coated with, but ordinary weapons can hardly scratch its skin. The only way to kill it is to wield a weapon of that tier. Even if we obtain Wu Yangzi's heritage and find the exit, we will still be in danger as long as we are unable to get rid of this fellow. Instead of risking it, we should just forge a spirit pinnacle weapon and slay it. A sharp glint flashed across Zhang Xian's eyes as he clenched his fists tightly. After fighting against the puppet, he realized that the only way to injure the puppet was to wield a spirit pinnacle weapon. Since there was a chance to upgrade his weapon now, it was best that he made full use of this opportunity and get rid of the threat looming before them. This. Luo Qiqi's face twitched. She didn't even have the confidence to upgrade the weapon to Spirit High Tier, but now she had to upgrade it to Spirit Pinnacle. How was that possible? Unconfident, Luo Qiqi said, "Teacher. Given my current capability, I can only soften the cold emerald stone and refine it slightly. I won't be able to melt it entirely. As such, I don't think I'll be able to forge a Spirit Pinnacle weapon." "Don't worry, that's enough." Understanding her worries, Zhang Xian smiled and reassured her. "Enough?" Luo Qiqi blinked her eyes in confusion. Cold emerald stone was indeed a rare and valuable ore, but it was significantly inferior to the crimson flower ore and gilt violet ore. Not to mention, her inability to fully melt the ore would make it harder to fuse it with the Glacier Rain sword. Given that, it would be already difficult to raise it to Spirit High Tier, needless to say, Pinnacle. How could she possibly succeed? Of the entire smithing process, what is the most important step to making a weapon sharper and harder? Zhang Xian asked. It's quenching. Luo Qiqi replied. Quenching could induce a qualitative change in a weapon through fusing the various materials within it better. Performing the quenching process well could cause a significant quality difference in two weapons forged using the same materials and smithing techniques. Using pill forging as an analogy, the more thoroughly the various medicinal herbs were fused together, the higher the quality of the formed pills. As such, quenching was an extremely important process that would determine the ultimate tier of the weapon. It was a technique that countless blacksmiths dreamt of mastering, but very few succeeded. Zhang Xian chuckled. Indeed, it's quenching. Under normal circumstances, the greater the difference in temperature, the better the effects of the quenching. However, given the limitations of your cultivation, it'll be impossible for us to raise the temperature to a satisfactory level. Since that's the case, we can always lower the temperature required for quenching. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.